Even if it's not a grudge, he might just be messing with them.
Yes.
Because I think he quite likes doing that.
Well, psychology, mind games. And
exactly. Make them beg.
Indeed.
And Starmer will be hating it because also he wants to try and plan his next sort of 3 weeks of travel.
No, indeed. And obviously with everything else that's happened over the last 24 hours, the sentencing of the monster, the evil ghoul that is Alex Rubalcaba. Of course, the thing that I had yesterday when I covered for Drive is the kind of the grief and the anger that is resulting in lots and lots of people now changing their minds on the death penalty. So we're talking about that, including me, I have to say.
Yeah, I think so. Russell Quirk coming next. Plank of the week tonight. I'll see you on Monday at 6.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning. Just gone 10 o'clock. I'm Russell Quirk in for Alex Phillips. I'll be with you till 1 o'clock, then handing over to Ian Collins. So yes, just gone 10. Another big news day. Obviously, we're going to be covering it all, as Mike has just done for the last 4 hours. And in particular, of course, the sentencing of Axel Rubalcaba, which certainly from when that happened, in fact, live on the show I covered yesterday on Drive, it has certainly got a reaction internationally, but of course also via you, our Talk audience. I have to say, yesterday I've never seen a switchboard so busy on this station. I suspect it will be very, very similar this morning. Please do join in 0344 499 1000. Of course, the show, I'm sure, will be somewhat dominated by the yesterday's events in terms of the sentencing of the monster, the evil ghoul that is Axel Rubalcaba, and the news, of course, that he was sentenced to 52 years in prison. He will serve served just over 51 years because of the whole time served thing. We'll be talking about that with a whole range of guests in terms of whether that was enough. Yes, of course, it's a long time, but many people, including the parents of his victims, saying, and I quote, this is from the mother of Elsie Stankham, one of the poor girls that was slaughtered by Axel Rudibugarna, who says, he took our daughter, her life, her future, and everything she could have been. There is no greater loss and no greater pain. His actions have left us with a lifetime of grief. So certainly a whole of life tariff would have been appropriate. That wasn't afforded to the judge, Lord Justice Goose, unfortunately. But look, let's talk about that, whether that's appropriate, and the fact that the sentencing was done by way of the rules. The law doesn't mean that the law and the rules, the sentencing guidelines as they are, can't be changed. Should they be? If you are not an adult, if you're under 18, but you commit an adult crime, as he did, crimes, surely you should be sentenced as an adult. Adult crime, adult sentence. What do you think? 0344 499 1000. So we'll be talking about that a lot. Of course, politicians, as you would expect, have come out of the blocks very quickly. Some might call it opportunism. Some might say in their defence, look, of course, they need to be all over this in terms of commentary and indeed doing things, saying things, but in particular doing things by way of action that A, prevents this sort of thing happening again. We know that this particular monster slipped through the fingers, slipped through the net of the authorities many times. Big questions to be answered there. What do you think of that? 0344 499 1000. Who's to blame? How should they be held to account, actually, as individuals? But back to the politician thing. Of course, we've had a statement from Keir Starmer, we've had a statement from Kemi Badenoch, a bit of hand-wringing, I have to say. Some, as I say, would call it opportunism, but Reform Party politicians, particularly Rupert Lowe and Lee Anderson, saying that the horrifying nature of the Southport attack warrants the death penalty. Now, when we talked about that yesterday in Drive, and since then, and certainly in Mike's show this morning, that has really triggered you. Lots and lots of people saying that they support the death penalty, particularly for child killers like Axel Rudibugarna, but actually people like me that did not support the death sentence and capital punishment, because we see it, some of us see it as overtly barbaric in a civilised society, but also not a deterrent. And I think the criminal justice system should be as much a deterrent as it is a punishment and as it is keeping people safe. But I have to tell you that in the last 24 hours, I have changed my mind. I do not want people like Axel Rudibugarna, even though he's now in prison, and he may well die in prison, fingers crossed. We do not want people like him on the face of this planet. What do you think? Do you agree with the death penalty? Have you had your mind changed in the last 24 hours, as I and many others have? 0344 499 1000. Please do let me know. You can leave a voice note, of course, via WhatsApp, or you can text 87222 and the word talk. And let us know what you think by way of text. And certainly over the last 24 hours, the amount of texts and phone calls that this station has had on this very subject have been absolutely enormous. So understandable, but also thank you. This is your station. It's not just the home of free speech and common sense. It's your station, and really the only station with common sense that has so much audience participation, something that we are very grateful for. I have some breaking news here, which is literally being typed as we speak, so bear with me, I'll read it slowly. That breaking news is that 3 judges who oversaw family court proceedings related to the care of Sarah Sharif, you remember that case, can be named next week, the Court of Appeal has ruled. So 3 judges who oversaw family court proceedings related to the care of Sarah Sharif, the failings therein, can be named next week, the Court of Appeal has ruled. So that will be a big story when that happens next week. OK, so look, I'm hoping, expecting lots and lots of calls. As I say, your participation is welcome, and we are very grateful for it. And a whole plethora of guests, and not least Kevin Hurley, who is a former Detective Chief Superintendent in the Metropolitan Police, joins me now. Kevin, good morning.
Morning.
Morning. A horrible subject to talk about. I was going to say, actually, in my introduction, that many people over the last day or two will want to forget the sentencing and the graphic detail that came out from that sentencing. Much of it actually too graphic to broadcast. And it's one of those things that you kind of want to put to the back of your mind just because you you don't want to keep thinking about the harrowing, grotesque nature of the crimes that were committed by the monster that is Axel Ruda-Kubana. But I would also argue that we need to make sure that, actually, in contrast to that, we ensure that we keep in mind the names of the victims for evermore, and we need to make sure that we do that indeed, so that we don't forget them. B.B. King, Elsie Stankham and Alice de Silva Aguiar. We must make sure that we remember them, and let's hope that the parole board in 51 years' time remember them too, Kevin.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think the key thing about this and all these dreadful events is, let's not legislate, let's not make decisions in anger. So let's pause and allow our sense of anger, frustration, and frankly, horror to subside before decisions are made as to what may or may not come next. But I think there's one clear thing that, to me, if you like, as a professional who's been involved in child protection issues, managing very difficult, deviant youths like this particular one, is concerned about, and it's this. This boy, or now man, came to the attention of police, education, social service, psychologists involved in prevent, countless times, and yet he reached this stage. Well, there's a need to look at, why is it that whether it's police officers and their supervisors, social workers and their supervisors, teachers and their supervisors, or psychologists and their supervisors, have lost their professional curiosity and their desire to frankly do the right thing. Because what's happened in society, what generally happens, often in anger or frustration, immediately politicians or civil servant type leaders, and I include that as police ones, bring in some system to check that won't happen, and they actually drive out the use of common sense by their staff, who once would have thought, this doesn't look right, this one is turning into a right wrong'un, I need to so we come together, make sure this one doesn't go off the rails.
Yeah, sorry, Kevin, we lost you for a second there. So your line might not be as intact as we'd like it to be, but let's persevere. Let me ask you a question. I do want to talk about sentencing. You say not to knee-jerk react. Some politicians are definitely going to do that. Some would call that opportunism or populism. Let's come back to that in a second. You talk about the failings of multiple agencies, it seems, in the journey of this evil monster to do what he did in Southport. What do we think the reasons behind those failings are? Do we think it's incompetence? Do we think it's lack of resource? Or I'm going to suggest, as many of our audience members will, that it's something else. And I'll come back to that in a second. But do you think it's either resource or competence, or a bit of both?
All of those, plus much more. Because everyone who was involved at looking at this case knows how to do their job, generally speaking. But what's occurred over the years as a result of increased bureaucracy or increased checks that are placed on people, you kind of ring fence round the ability of individual police, social services, education, or psychologists to think, oh, he's a right wrong'un, this one. We need to do something. Let's pick up Fred or Anne in social services. Let's get a multi-agency conference together and look at what we've got in the round here and manage this case to prevent something terrible happening. And what we've done, we've caused the situation to happen where people become more and more silo-like, if you like, in their operations.
So Kevin, you're suggesting it's admin, it's bureaucracy, it's bureaucratic treacle? Is that what you're suggesting?
No, I'm not. I'm not. I mean, that's part of it. What I'm suggesting is a mindset has developed within various organisations and the leadership of it, driven by politicians who knee-jerk and say something must be done, and that trickles down the line to the teachers, the police chiefs, the head of social services. Right, we'll bring in this system and we'll do this, instead of saying, you guys and women, you men and women who are the professionals, if you think someone's a wrong'un and it smells like it and it looks like it, seize it and push the boundaries with your partners to pull it together. So what I'm talking about, in an ideal world, what might have happened by the time we'd got to maybe the second, third prevent, and we were meeting, fact he'd be continually ejected from school, assaulted people at school, been taken to court with possession of a knife and so on.
Yeah.
Get people together and say, do we actually need to take this child in, because he's a child at that time, into care for his own protection?
Or to have him not just into care. I mean, the flags and the signs were all there that he should have been sectioned under the Mental Health Act for his protection and the protection of society. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I was about to say that. The options are take him in, potentially see if you could take him into care, and if necessary, put him into controlled care, i.e., into what is effectively a young person's detention centre, or does he need further mental health referrals? And the concern to me is each one of these separate groups, separate people, separate agencies have kind of dropped the ball. If there's something that needs to be done, there might be a case for creating an intelligence system that everyone contributes in, and in some cases that will.
And Kevin, so what you're saying is that people within those agencies, no one wants to make a big decision because they're worried about being the person that's made that big decision and maybe getting it wrong. So instead of taking the risk, getting it wrong, albeit based on the facts and the evidence, they shy away from the decision. I'm going to suggest something else, though, which I know that the people listening to this and watching will now be asking, which is there an ethnicity angle here? And what I mean by that is that we've talked a lot, particularly since the summer, the unrest, the riots in the summer, of two-tier care, two-tier justice, two-tier policing, which to many of us has been absolutely 100% evident in Britain. And I know there are many on the left that say it doesn't exist. The government says it doesn't exist, but you'd have to be a moron not to acknowledge that two-tier policing and two-tier justice does exist and is alive and unwell in this country. Do we think, potentially, possibly, that one of the reasons that this monster has slipped through the net so many times is because those people in those agencies were being overtly protective because of political correctness, because of his ethnicity, second generation immigrant, that they didn't want to be seen to be, inverted commas, persecuting someone of an ethnic minority in case of, and again I go back to the proof with regard to why the grooming rape gang situation festered and progressed so much, was because the police, not your old service, but the Greater Manchester Police, said we did not want to incite racial tensions. Do you think there could be an element of that here with regards to the Ruda Cabana case?
I do.
Sorry, Kevin, just say that again. Sorry, we lost your line just for a second. Say that again. So are you agreeing with me or disagreeing?
You make a very good point. And knowing human beings as I do, almost undoubtedly that will have been at the back of the minds of the decisions of people that they would not want to be too robust, lest they are challenged either by a pro bono lawyer or by an activist group in taking some form of quite strong action to control the behaviour of that boy. Combined with, in the cases of some of them, possibly a sense of post-colonial guilt or something similar to that.
Do you mean wokeism, Kevin?
You might call it that. I'll call it post-colonial guilt, which is a term used in the first inquiry. Exactly that. But I'm sure.
Can we just hang on, Kevin? I know it's not you advocating post-colonial guilt. What an absolutely ridiculous phrase that is. I mean, who on earth allows that phrase to continue in public parlance? Post-colonial guilt. We did more for colonies and other countries in terms of pulling them up by their bootstraps, in terms of showing them how to trade and work commercially. We did more for those countries than we get credit for. But to now, 250 years later, and again, whether it's slavery reparations or whatever, to be using that phrase, not you, but others in the police service, in social services, as some kind of reason to let certain demographics off the hook. That we've literally gone through a wormhole here, haven't we?
Well, I mean, I formally they wouldn't use that term, but I think it plays into the minds of lots of people who'll be working in those organisations because they're now being spoon-fed at school and at universities how bad the United Kingdom or Great Britain was in the management of its colonies, India, the Caribbean, Africa, and so on. So if that's subliminally put into the minds of people, a lot of people will think, yeah, we weren't good to people of colour.
And it's filtering down, and then as a
of
consequence, you end up with cases exactly like Axel Rudakabana.
Yeah.
Yes or no, Kevin? Death penalty, should it be reinstated?
Well, if you're talking about me personal knee-jerk and what I believe in vengeance, actually, as just my life. Whether or not a modern society should do that, there's an argument maybe it should, but if we were, we'd need to have immense numbers of checks and balances to be certain that was the right person. But again, I make this point, in this case...
But he pleaded guilty.
We would be saying, let's give this death penalty to a 17-year-old child.
Yeah, but he's not a child in the murders that he committed, is he? No one cares about that.
Yep.
No one cares.
No, I agree.
If you're big enough, if you're big enough to commit an adult crime, you're big enough to hang.
Well, the issue on it is, of course, he's a child in law. And what does it look like elsewhere in the world when people look at our society? Don't get me wrong, I'm not defending him. I know what I would personally like to do to him, and it would be, it doesn't bear talking about on TV.
No.
But, legally, he's a child.
Yeah, well, he's not now. No, now he's 18, but of course he committed these atrocities about 8 days before his 18th birthday. Kevin, I've got to let you go. I've got to move on. The switchboard is lighting up. I'm going to get some calls after the break. But just first, let me just bring that breaking news to you again, just reaching us in the last few minutes or so. 3 judges who oversaw family court proceedings related to the care, or otherwise, rather, the failings in regard to Sarah Sharif can be named next week, the Court of Appeal has ruled. So that will be a big story when that drops in terms of the names of those 3 judges next week, and we will of course be covering that minute to minute as that happens next week. I'm Russell Quirk, this is Talk, and we will be back after the break with your calls.
UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk. It's 10:24. This is Talk, the home of common sense and indeed free speech, which means when you call, within reason, you can say what you like, as long as you, yes, don't say anything defamatory. Jackie in Oldham has called 0344 499 1000. Jackie, what do you want to say?
Hi, Russell.
Hi.
I don't agree with the death penalty because I think that would be too easy for him. I think the only crumb of comfort I can take is by the research and listening to experts. I know that in prison he will never know peace. Unfortunately, well, or fortunately, there is a hierarchy of morality within the criminal fraternity, and child killers are the bottom of the pile. He will know unimaginable torment from the other prisoners. They've already put him into segregation.
But he'll be in solitary confinement for pretty much forever, won't he?
Yes, and he will be tormented. And I would rather, people think, oh, well, he's given prison games and all this, that and the other, and he'll be able to sit there quite happily play. No. He won't get any sleep. They will be screaming into his cells, telling him what they were going to do to him. He will never, ever know peace for 52 years. And that is, to me, is so be it.
And that gives you some comfort, Jackie?
Yeah, it does, because he will go through torment for all them years. Why should the taxpayer pay for him to be in prison and then do appeals for the death penalty, which will cost millions and millions and millions of pounds, and we don't know whether he'll, it will go ahead after it all?
Yeah.
No. Let him be tormented like he tormented them children, what he's left with them children, and hopefully it's for the rest of his life.
51 years of, certainly mental torment. Yes, I would be amazed if he is let out ever into the general population of whichever prison or prisons he ends up in, because it will be absolutely known that there is a danger to him and his life. Now, many people watching this, listening to this, won't care about that, but of course, when it comes to the prison system, I'm sure that they will be compelled to keep him safe. I think the only way to do that is to make sure he's locked up. I hope he doesn't get tellies, PlayStations, and so on. Maybe that might be why he changed his plea so suddenly, to the convenience of many. Of course, Jackie, at the beginning of this week, he very suddenly changed his plea from not guilty, or actually not entering a plea at all, to guilty. I hope that the authorities didn't persuade him to do that in order for the trial to be over with very, very quickly, rather than certain questions being asked and answers given that might be inconvenient to some, but on the basis that he would get an easier time in prison. Do you think that might be the case?
I don't think it'll be the case, because he's a Category A prisoner. He'll be going to some of the worst prisons in the country.
He's been in Belmarsh, I think, hasn't he? Which, of course, is a maximum security prison full of the worst offenders in Britain, or some of them, and, of course, including terrorists, where he may well feel quite at home, unfortunately.
And the thing is that, that he will be a target. He will be a target because of what he's done. So he'll either have to spend in solitary confinement for the rest of the 52 years. They can't put him in general population because they won't be able to guarantee his safety. Yeah. But prisoners, like Peter Sutcliffe was got to, Myra Hindley was got to, they tried the very best, but prisoners are, with this morality code that they have, they are determined that they will not allow these people to not suffer.
Well, of course, you may have heard, Jackie, I just read breaking news with regard to 3 judges that oversaw the family court proceedings of Sarah Sharif. Of course, her father is now in prison, and within weeks he was slashed across the neck with the remnants of a tuna can. So these people can be got to, and I'm not advocating that. Be very clear, I'm not. But, prison is, I guess we term it, it's the Wild West, isn't it? In terms of...
It is.
And as you say, there's a hierarchy, there's a morality, and there will be a lot of robbers and drug dealers and so on in prison who have kids, and in particular daughters. So, yes, read into that what you will. Jackie from Oldham, thank you very much indeed for your contribution. Let's go to Paul in Burnley. Lots of your calls coming in, by the way. Keep them coming. 0344 409 1000. Agree with me, disagree with me, opinion, or even if you just want to sound off, whatever, call us. This is your station. Paul, welcome.
Morning, Russell. Thanks for having me on.
Pleasure.
I'd like to challenge your assertion that the death penalty isn't a deterrent, and I'll try and do it in this kind of way. Imagine a guy wakes up and he carries out a murder when there's no death penalty. That murder will be a statistic. Imagine that there is a death penalty and he wakes up and he thinks twice about it because he'd lose his own life. He then doesn't carry out that murder, and that isn't a statistic. So we'll never know the number of people that it deterred. Why? Because they didn't do it.
Yeah. I hear you. There's always going to be miscarriages. But I suppose my counter, Paul, would be that in the US right now, there are over 2,000 people on death row. They were not deterred from their crimes by the death penalty.
Yeah, I agree. There'll be some people that it will never ever deter, but we will never.
It would not, without doubt, have deterred Axel Rudick-Cabana because he's a psychopath. Psychopaths aren't deterred by such things. So and it wouldn't deter ideological terrorists. It probably wouldn't deter crimes of passion. You know, many murders, of course, are committed by people known to the victim. So I'm not sure. I think you're right. Of course, it's going to be a deterrent to some, but it's not going to be a deterrent enough, I think, for many of us to be convinced. Although I have had my mind changed, as you might have heard earlier. For many to be convinced that it's something that should be put in place as a deterrent. Frankly, honestly, Paul, if I thought it was going to be an absolute deterrent, I would have been in favour of it probably a long time ago. But I think the US statistics, 2092 to be exact, I'm hearing 2092 prisoners on death row that committed murders, heinous crimes, despite knowing they would hang for those crimes.
Yeah, fair enough. But in 1965, when the death penalty existed, the year after, with the same population, the number of murders that were carried out rose. So previously, those people that the year after that became statistics, perhaps would have been put off because the death penalty was a deterrent. It was the same population, and there was approximately a 10% increase in murders the year after.
No, fair enough. But I'm not a statistician, Paul, but and you might be, but that's just 1 year. What happened in the 10 years after that? I mean, look, we certainly know that murders and serious crimes, sexual crimes, have increased significantly, year on year, decade on decade since. So you may well have a point. But I think supporting or otherwise the death penalty is not just about that. It is also about justice. It's also about justice being seen to be done. A lot of people, when I was covering Drive yesterday, said it wasn't so much an issue of deterrent. It was more that they just wanted to know that the planet was rid of this monster, this individual, on the basis that would be punishment. But also there's a huge element of vengeance there. And I'm afraid as human beings, vengeance, revenge is a kind of trait that we can't help ourselves to display. So I don't criticise it, but my question mark is, in a civilised society, is taking somebody else's life by way of vengeance acceptable and appropriate? Now, again, I say that, Paul, qualifying the fact that as of yesterday, for certain cases, like Rudick-Cabana, I have definitely changed my mind. I would like to see him swing. I'm not sitting here from the point of view of saying that I'm absolutely against the death penalty 100%. I'm just saying that I guess it should be in place for the right reasons rather than just one of vengeance, do you think?
Well, we might have some common ground here, Russell, because you hit the nail on the head. You said in a civilised society. Rudick-Cabana wasn't civilised. It was a demonic savage. And I'm going to take a leaf out of Lee Anderson's book, and we've seen it time and time again where people have been released and they murder. The only way to guarantee that they don't murder is to let them swing.
Yeah, and look, and on your side of the argument, I'd also say, in support of the death penalty, I suppose, that the fact is that at the age of 69, Axel Rudick-Cabana could be out of prison. If we have a yoghurt-knitting, lily-livered liberalised parole board in 51 years' time, he could be out on the streets, and of course he should never be allowed out. Paul from Burnley, thank you very much indeed. Loads of your calls coming in. We'll get to some more of those later. Also lots and lots and lots of texts. But coming up after the break is Anne Widdecombe, no less. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk. Back in a couple.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back, Russell Quirk, 10:36. I'm here till 1 o'clock. I'm delighted now on the subject of the monster that is Axel Rubicaner and many other things to be joined by no less than Anne Widdecombe, who needs no introduction, really, former Home Office Minister, very, very prominent. Anne, thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Good morning, yes.
Yes, good morning. Look, Anne, can we talk about the death penalty? I suspect you have
indeed.
strong views. Look, I've had my mind changed, but I'm going to be devil's advocate for a second, if I may, just for a semblance of balance. The death penalty is barbaric, particularly in a civilised society, and it's not a deterrent.
Now, I've heard your previous discussion on deterrent. The trouble is you're all discussing it in a vacuum. Let's look at what the actual figures are. The death penalty, as Paul from Burnley said, was abolished in 1965. Until then, murder fell, and this is important to understand, into two different categories. Those murders that would have attracted the death penalty and those murders that would not have done. And we called the first the capital murder rate because you were subject to capital punishment. Now, for 5 years after the death penalty was abolished in 1965, we continued to collect statistics precisely in order to assess whether it was a... We continued to collect statistics on that same basis. Murder that would have been capital, murder that wouldn't. And in that period, the capital murder rate went up 125%. The incidence of criminals taking firearms on robberies went up something like, I think it was 40%. There was a huge rise that proved conclusively that it had been a deterrent. Now, you might still oppose it on other grounds, but it was a deterrent. And your analogy with America, if I may say so, doesn't stand up, because in this country, if you were found guilty, you had a right of appeal, obviously, the Home Secretary had the final say. It was all very quick, and you would be doing the 8 o'clock within, a few months, sometimes even less than that. On death row, you can be there for decades. There's no deterrent. There's no, I did this and I'm going to pay that tomorrow morning. You can be there.
Because of the appeals process, presumably, which is so elongated.
Yeah. I mean, it's a ridiculous system in America, quite honestly, ridiculous. But no, it is a deterrent. And, you can argue on all sorts of moral grounds, but not on deterrence.
So, but I accept that it would deter, particularly, let's call them professionalised crimes. But what about psychopaths? Yeah, what about psychopaths, and what about terrorism? I mean, I can't see an ideologically obsessed terrorist, an Islamic extremist, or shall we for balance say far-right extremist that might actually commit a terrorist atrocity. I can't see them being deterred by the death penalty, so it wouldn't fix that problem.
Yeah, I would never claim that it would. There have always been people throughout history when there were far more ghastly punishments than merely being hanged, hanged, drawn and quartered. It didn't deter people with certain conditions or who were ideologically driven. They would face burning at the stake if they had to.
Yeah.
So, of course, you're right on that score. But overall, it's a huge deterrent. Do you think of the number of lives that would be saved if we had it?
Yeah. And balanced against the fact that sometimes there are miscarriages of justice, Anne?
Yes. Well, again, I think that the big difference between now and, say, the 1950s is that we have DNA.
Yeah.
And in many, many cases, there is no doubt whatever that somebody has done it. If you remember, well, you probably won't remember, but there was a huge campaign on behalf of somebody called Hanratty, who was supposed to have been hanged unjustly. And DNA came along quite a while afterwards, but was used to test the case, and lo and behold, he was guilty. So, I mean, and in this case, this is different because he was a juvenile at the time. But in this case, there is no doubt at all, that he did it. I mean, he's never denied it.
And what we've heard on this station over the last 24 hours since the sentencing, obviously since this came to the fore so prominently yesterday as a consequence of the sentencing of Axel Rudiker-Bana by his Justice Judge Goose, it seems to be that there's an outpouring, of course, of anger, grief, and, frankly, amazement at the hideous nature, the evil nature of these crimes. But when it comes to the death penalty, there's definitely an underlying current of a motive of revenge and vengeance. Do you think there's place for that in terms of that justifying the death penalty, that it can simply be human nature saying, we want rid of this individual, he should be wiped from the face of the earth because of his crime? So nothing to do with deterrent, not even justice really, but just an eye for an eye. Do you think that's justified?
No. I mean, I think the feeling of outrage is justified. I think the immediate feeling, we want vengeance on this man, that is perfectly understandable. It's not the role of the law. It really is not the role of the law. That is why we have law. It's so that we don't have justice delivered by lynch mobs. We don't even have justice delivered by victims. We have to have justice delivered by a completely impartial process. That's why we have the law. And I, as a Christian, am not going to say that I want to kill somebody purely out of vengeance. I look at the bigger picture. As I say, this case, it wouldn't apply anyway because he was a juvenile. But there's a bigger picture, and that picture is that if it's really a deterrent, then it saves lives.
Yes.
And so you have to make a moral choice. Do you save the life of the criminal, or do you save the life of the potential victims? That's the choice.
Reform MPs Rupert Lowe and Lee Anderson have said in the last few hours that they want to see, and I think this is a quote from them, they want to see Axel Rudiker-Bana hang. Do we expect to see some kind of move in Parliament now, do you think, for a motion to reinstate the death penalty? Do you think that will happen? Can that happen? Can that be brought to the chamber?
It can happen in as much as we're now free of European law, which would have prevented us doing it. It can, but it wouldn't get a majority. I mean, the one thing I think you can point to is that every time the death penalty has been debated in Parliament, and the Conservatives used to allow it once every Parliament, every time that has happened, the majority against it is grown.
But do you think that parliamentarians are out of step with the country? Because I suspect they are in that regard.
Well, nevertheless, that is our process for making law.
Yeah. Well, no, true. But one of my callers earlier on said, now is not the time to be discussing and debating such things. Of course, we know that when on a weekly basis there is a gun atrocity in the United States, the politicians, particularly on the Republican side, say, look, now is not the time in the immediate aftermath of such an incident to discuss this on a knee-jerk basis. But I would suggest, actually, that this is exactly the time in Parliament to be discussing this, isn't it?
No. I mean, I take the line that this is something that needs careful thought, it needs to be argued rationally and coolly, and that is what has to happen now. Everybody at the moment is focused on the fact he's got 52 years in jail. He's going to be an old man by the time he comes out, if he comes out ever.
Yeah.
And that is the punishment that he has. And it seems to me in the circumstances, bearing in mind he was 17, it's adequate.
Yeah. And so with...
Sorry,
Anne. Yeah, you're suffering a little bit there. Sorry, and we won't keep you that much longer. But do you think that the rules need to change then in terms of sentencing guidelines, whereby if someone is able to commit an adult crime as Axel Rudickabana did, that they should be sentenced as an adult? I mean, forget the fact that he was only 8 days away from his 18th birthday, but the fact that the judge showed much frustration yesterday, actually, Justice Goose, with regard to lamenting the fact that, of course, if Rudickabana had been 18, he would have given him a whole life tariff. Do you think it's now appropriate for those sentencing guidelines to be relooked at?
I think you could look at what I call senior juveniles, sort of 16, 17-year-olds, who should have developed enough empathy and moral understanding. I think you might well look at that and say, could it be appropriate in extreme circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't want to be hanging 10-years, Anne, would we? Like the Bulger killers.
I hope not. I really hope, Mary Bell, I hope not. No. But what I'm saying, what I've just tried to say is that if you look at older juveniles, if you look at 16 and 17-year-olds, there might just be an argument for allowing a whole life tariff. But in effect, this is what this is. I mean, you add 52 and 18 together, and you've got an old age pensioner staggering out of prison.
Well, he's 70, but a liberal parole board, as I called them, and we have had many instances, many causes to criticise the parole board in recent years, the likes of Gary Glitter and others. We're not particularly confident, are we, as a society, albeit that this is going to be 52 years away, of a parole board insisting that he stays in, despite the comments by Judge Goose. I mean, he could still be out walking the streets at 70 years old.
The fact is, you're talking half a century ahead, and we don't even know what our systems will be then.
Or if we have a system.
Oh, we'll have a system, but we don't know what it will be.
It depends how the Labour government leave the country in 4 years' time, Anne, doesn't it?
Well, I could describe to you how they'll leave the country in 4 years' time, but I'm talking a half a century ahead, and we really don't know, and we shouldn't speculate on that.
So you think it was an adequate sentence and Judge Goose did the right thing as much as he was
I think he did the only thing he could do, and I think it was an adequate sentence.
Yeah, good. Anne Widdecombe, as ever, thank you very, very much indeed for your wise words and clarification. Let me just read you a couple of texts. Mark in Coventry says, I want a death sentence for murderers like Rudickabana and the killers of Lee Rigby, where there is no doubt, caught red-handed, so to speak, whereas the likes of Lucy Letby, where there is an element of doubt, they should not face the death penalty. Well, I'm not quite sure, Mark, how you square that circle, because Lucy Letby is one of only 70 or so people in Britain that was given a whole-of-life tariff. So you would imagine that given that she was found guilty of multiple murders, she would be in line for the death penalty if we still had it. So quite how we differentiate between one type of murder, as Anne Widdecombe has just said, in the old days, capital murder and others, I really don't know. We also have here Paul in Fife texting in saying, some years ago, Rudickabana would have been locked up in a correction centre or in an asylum. But we closed asylums and allowed dangerous psychopaths to live in society because it's cruel to lock them up, apparently. We've become a society where our institutions designed to protect us are protecting actually the people that are going to do us harm. And there is a lot to be said for that, indeed. Right, we're going to take another break, back in a second, and we're going to talk about the weather. I don't know what it's like where you are, but there's yet more weather warnings out there. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk. I'll be back in a sec.
I've been asked earlier today not to mention his name, and I'm not going to, because I think that's good. I think that's quite right. Why would we give him the honour of naming him? And in fact, you know what? You put a picture up of him. Let's get rid of that. Let's not even put his picture anymore in front of the people. It's a horrible picture. He looks demented. He looks deranged. I think it's better if we don't even see that picture anymore. You know, let's consign him to the dustbin of history, and let's hope we never hear from him or his representatives ever again.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk here with you till 1 o'clock, sitting in for Alex Phillips. Let's talk about the weather. A bit of a change of gear, because there's a few more weather warnings about. We seem to have a weather warning kind of every week, though, don't we? Whether it's the cold, whether it's rain, whether it's snow. You know, we might get a centimetre of snow, and we all are told to stay in, either by the Meteorological Office or indeed by the NHS recently. But now it is windy, apparently. So let's talk to Joe Wheeler about that, a meteorologist. Joe, how windy is it?
Well, it has been exceptionally windy. Over parts of Western Ireland, we saw gusts up to 114.9 miles per hour. And that beats the previous record of 113 miles per hour, set in 1945, so 80 years ago. And that one was in Limerick. So those winds really picked up in the early hours of the morning, became very strong over parts of Ireland. They've now moved mostly into parts of Wales, where again we've got gusts over 90 miles per hour. I should say that value of 114 pretty much puts it in a Category 1 hurricane situation. So we don't often see winds like that. And those winds are going to continue their way up into parts of Scotland through this afternoon. So yes, we do have a lot of warnings out. The red ones are the danger to life ones. Those over Ireland expire about 2 o'clock this afternoon, but the ones over Scotland much more long lasting, because really the strongest winds haven't got there yet. There's an amber warning for northern parts of England, so bad but not quite as bad, and a yellow warning across much of the country. But you know, once we've said goodbye to those, we've got snow and ice for tonight for parts of Scotland, and then we've got further wind and rain over the weekend. But these tend to be yellow warnings, or at least they are at the moment. So it is going to be quite a stormy few days, all things considered, and obviously the damage from these storms is massive. We've got something like 713,000 houses in the Republic of Ireland without power, and about 93,000 through Northern Ireland. I don't have figures for anywhere through Wales at the moment, but obviously infrastructure is being badly affected. All rail, all ferries, all flights, pretty much cancelled, and the advice is not to travel if you don't have to, because there'll be a lot of stuff flying around as well.
Yeah, and Joe, so regionally the worst areas affected by these winds, by the sounds of it, are Scotland, northern England. So it's sounding like the south east and the southwest going to get away with it in comparison a little.
Well, yes, sort of. I did hear that one of your colleagues was blown over this morning on their way into work. And right outside the News UK building, there's an incredible wind tunnel where everything is kind of funneled through and it gets stronger and stronger.
Yeah, I think that was Dave the tech here. He falls over all the time.
I didn't ask about what he'd imbibed beforehand.
Yes, he did.
I was told he did fall over. But, you know, colleagues of mine who've been travelling up from the far south into London today also reported a lot of aquaplaning when the water was still around, and also very blustery conditions. I'm out on the East Coast, so probably one of the areas least affected. And I've still got to go and see my neighbours this afternoon and retrieve various bits from my garden.
Oh, wow. So these weather warnings, Joe, we do seem to have an increasing number of them. It seems to me that we are getting to a stage, though, maybe not including what we're talking about today, and I'm not kind of trying to diminish the seriousness of 114 mile per hour winds, because yeah, that's pretty serious stuff. But do you think that we are being inundated with weather warnings now on an increasing basis? So we end up in a kind of little boy that cried wolf situation, don't we? Because I'm kind of getting to the stage now where I'm beginning to ignore them.
Yes, and I think there are various issues with this. For a start, as far as the Met Office are concerned, when they issue a warning, it's usually an impact warning, which means that suppose you get some very strong winds over Scotland, it's gusting to 60 miles per hour. Well, Scotland's not too worried about that. They're used to it for a start, and it's not very densely populated. Put those winds down in the south, and you've got a very different story because it's more densely populated, there's more traffic, you know, all sorts of bins and supermarket trolleys to go flying about. So there's a degree of impact on that. And also just recently, there were a lot of complaints after Storm Bert. Now, of course, as that storm came in, we were talking about the snow. There was a warning for snow over Scotland. There was also a warning of rain over parts of Wales and the west. But everybody focused on the snow. So even though we'd said there was going to be flooding across Wales, they could see up to a month's worth of rain in a couple of days. That was kind of forgotten about until it flooded. And at that point, of course, that became important. So when you get these multi-hazard events, and even this Eowyn has given some snow on its leading edge, so parts of Scotland, Northern England have seen some snow as well. You can warn against the snow, you can warn against the snow and ice, you can warn against the rain, you can warn against the wind. And then you also mentioned the heat alerts. Now, in actual fact, those aren't really for public consumption. They should never be told to anybody.
They shouldn't, but Joe, let's be clear that when we see them on certain media channels, I mean, let's call them out as they are, the BBC, those temperatures now, anything above 30 degrees, those warning maps have got redder and redder and redder. Now, look, 30 degrees is pretty warm. It pales into insignificance in terms of how other elements of the planet survive in the Middle East, for instance, in their summer at plus 50 degrees. But do we really want to see bright red, flashing red warnings because it's summer and because in the middle of July we might have temperatures of 31 degrees? I mean, that's not hot, is it?
No, and in part I agree with you. On the other hand, if we hadn't made advancements in terms of our weather graphics, we'd still be sticking clouds on with a bit of Velcro. So obviously,
is that what you used to do?
Yeah, I know.
Did you?
I didn't do that. I didn't.
You're far too young, Joe. Far too young.
Yeah, absolutely. No, but as far as the weather graphic's concerned, obviously our ability to forecast, our ability to pinpoint temperatures, pinpoint hazards, pinpoint weather itself has improved vastly over the last however many years. And so has our ability to portray it.
So do you think it's being weaponised, Joe? I mean, are you about to say that weather is being sensationalised? It does feel a bit like that.
A bit like all other types of entertainment. I mean, we could still be watching Play School.
But when did weather become entertainment?
Because it's part of everybody's diet of TV intake or media intake, and therefore the more visually stimulating it is, the more attractive it is. I mean, we've gone from having somebody sitting at a table with a Bakelite phone reading the news to you, to the all flashing, all dancing. We've got time bugs, we've got news straps, we've got sports straps. News has developed that way, so why shouldn't weather?
Yeah, I guess so. And honestly, and I don't want to get into a kind of political climate change debate with you because I actually don't know where you stand on such things, but you talked about the increase in winds. I think you said 114 miles an hour versus the previous record of 113 miles per hour, but it's taken 80 years. Now, that doesn't sound like rapid climate change if that is the culprit here.
Well, you have to understand that we in the Weatherhood, we get so excited when things like this happen. Even though it's only 1 mile an hour difference over 80 years, it's still a record broken. And we go, wow! I mean, this storm was obviously unusual. You can't deny that because we are breaking records and we've seen these very strong winds. We saw very strong winds in...
Joe, I'm ever so sorry. I'm going to have to stop you because we've got to go to the news. But look, thank you very, very much indeed. We will see you again soon, no doubt. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk. We will be back after the news and a quick break with Chris Phillips, former head of National Counterterrorism at Security Office.
the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk. I'm here till 1 o'clock, joined by lots of guests and lots of you, by the sounds of it. Lots and lots of calls coming in to 03444 499 1000. Do get involved. Of course, you can leave a WhatsApp message on the same number, 03444 499 1000, or do what dozens and dozens and dozens of you have done this morning already and text 87222 plus the word Talk with your opinion, your point, your agreement, your disagreement, whatever. This is the home of free speech. Do get involved. Right, let's turn now to Chris Phillips. Chris Phillips is the former head of the National Counterterrorism Security Office. And of course, we're going to talk about the Axel Rudicabana case. And in particular, Chris, welcome.
Good morning, Russell.
Good morning. In particular, let's talk about the sentence, shall we, first, in terms of whether you believe, as a starting point, that it was adequate or whether sentencing guidelines should be changed to allow a whole-of-life sentence for those under 18?
Well, yes, I do. We certainly think, or certain sections of our political society think that people are able to vote and make sensible decisions at 16. So when we're talking about people who are on the verge of being 18, surely they're just as responsible as an adult.
Yeah, and I think many people would agree with you. And I think the world's changed. I think, youngsters are growing up quicker. And certainly if a youngster can make rice in and have a crossbow and a zombie knife under their bed and go out and commit such atrocities, they should be dealt with as an adult. Adult crime, adult sentence, from my point of view. And I don't think many people listening to this seem to disagree with that, certainly from what I'm seeing from the calls coming in and the text messages. Let's talk about the terrorism element to this, or rather not, Chris, because, of course, the government and the CPS have made it very, very clear that, in their opinion, this was not terrorism. Lots and lots of people that I've seen on social media over the last day or so disagreeing with that. Now, I know there's a technical definition in terms of terrorism as a charge, as a label to an incident, has to meet certain tests in terms of it being the crime, the event being of an ideological nature. So generally something that seeks to change policy, government policy, something of a religious or a racial, an ideological nature. How do you feel about this not being deemed terrorism, given the terrorist elements to it, particularly the Ricin and the Al-Qaeda manual that were found in Axel Rudicabana's house?
I think Russell, we should ask ourselves, would it make any difference? He wouldn't have got a stiffer sentence had it been terrorism. So really, there is no point in this being labelled as a terrorist attack. There are terrorist elements, as you quite rightly put, with regards to the Ricin, which, and that alone is, really bizarre thing to do, unless you want to kill people, of course. And the terrorist manual, I think Al-Qaeda manual, these things do have a terrorist slant, but I think from a practical perspective, we need to look, would it have made any difference to the sentencing? No, he wouldn't have got any more. The simple fact is we have a definition of terrorism which sets it aside from other laws, effectively, in that you have to have, you're right, this violence, you have to have the violence or the threat of violence in order to do something specific, like change government, change the way we live, turn us all into extreme Islamic Muslims, etc. Would it have made any difference to the sentencing? No, I don't think it would.
And we're saying, Chris, that the CPS, who obviously decided not to pursue such an avenue, there was no evidence at all, despite the fact that it seems that he did convert to Islam and may well have been radicalised. I mean, there's some sketchiness around that, of course. Despite all of that, the CPS not able to unequivocally say that this was terrorism. Did you think some of this, and again, kind of going back to your days in counter-terrorism, do you think there was an issue there in terms of labelling it as such, and that then being a means by which, if that was disproved in court, that Axel Rudicabana might have got off the hook?
Well, it could have made a difference, and you know, with legislation, you have to charge under the act that's most appropriate. And the CPS, I mean, I don't think there would have been an issue with charging with terrorism had he had some motive. I mean, this guy, his motive seems just to be to kill people.
Yeah.
And of course, in the United States, we have on almost a weekly basis a kid going into school and killing lots of other kids, and they aren't necessarily terrorism either. So it's a bit of conjecture, but I certainly think that if there was a real element of I'm doing this for a religious or for a political motive, then he would have been charged, I'm sure.
Yeah, but maybe I guess there are some, and you would have to argue on the right, that perhaps are seeking that terrorism link, I guess, maybe for their own kind of political satisfaction, if you know what I mean. From your point of view, though, you're saying it doesn't really matter. I guess it doesn't, because the crimes were the crimes. He was simply a psychopath. I wonder also, obviously, given his connections to Rwanda, I mean, he was a second-generation immigrant. His parents from Rwanda. Rwanda, of course, very, very famous, infamous for all the wrong reasons, for a genocide, something that he seemed to have been obsessed with. I mean, there was material recovered from his house, his parents' house, relating to the detail of the Rwandan genocide, amongst other things. I mean, do you think there's a connection to be made there because of his heritage?
Well, there may well be. We don't exactly know who his father is, I don't think, and what his past is. But I say this, 52 years, that's as much as he would have ever got for any terrorism offence. I think it's obnoxious to think that he'll ever walk on the streets of the UK or anywhere ever again. I think the bigger point, Russell, if I could make it, is that we need to be braver with people who are showing these kind of signs, to lock them up before they actually commit the offence, rather than wait for them to do it, like it seems to have happened here. We seem to be scared of actually dealing with really bad people.
Yeah, and we touched on that earlier on, actually. In fact, we touched on that a number of times, that it seems that the authorities are scared, whether it's scared to make a decision, whether they are simply so left-wing and so woke that they believe that everybody can be changed and reformed and deserves a second, third, fourth, fifth chance, or in Axel Rudakabana's case, 11, 12 or 13 chances, given how many times he was found to be in possession of a knife and goodness knows what else. So, yeah, no, I think there is that. And I think also, as we touched on the show earlier on, I think there is an element of political correctness here. It may well be that the reason that he slipped through the net so many times was because of the hesitance by the authorities to label him as a threat given his ethnicity. And I think, look, we've seen that over the last few months with regard to the way that there is a difference in how different demographics have been dealt with in the aftermath of Southport, particularly when it comes to the riots. Certain demographics being allowed to behave as they want on the streets of Birmingham, for instance, as vigilantes. But when it comes to protesters, that are protesting Southport and the lack of information and the fact that it may well be that there was an immigrant connection to the Southport murders, those individuals, of course, are dealt with in a very, very different way. So I do wonder if Keir's two-tier approach to governance, and indeed that filtering down to the justice system and the police, is also at play here when it comes to why Axel Rudakabana was not prevented from doing this many years ago.
Well, it most definitely is a big issue. Political correctness has gone right through the system. People are scared, police officers as well, are scared to deal with the real problems, generally because they have these other issues of political correctness.
Because they're scared of being called racist and being scared to have a complaint levied against them and being taken off duty just because they've stopped and searched someone that happens to be black, and that black person says, you're only stopping and searching me because I'm black. I mean, how do we stop that nonsense?
Well, we need to get a grip, really, as a nation, and understand that.
How do we do
crime
that?
is. We have such nonsense around political correctness, particularly in policing and the criminal justice system. We do need to deal with the issues that we face now. If you look at the gang-led culture within our cities, unfortunately, whichever way you want to play it, it's generally black on black.
Yeah,
that's the way it is in our cities. And I've policed city centres, and I know exactly the issues that we face. But but then, you know, if you then prevent the police officers from doing the stop and search on the very people that you're most likely to be carrying it, because you say, well, you've got to stop an equal number of white people to black people, then you're just playing around with the system.
Well, it's worse than that, though, Chris, isn't it? Is the directive more along the lines of don't stop ethnic minorities because they will shout racism? Because, like with the grooming rape gang scandal, the police, councils, the authorities are worried about being not just labelled racist, but being seen to be the catalyst for, big inverted commas here again, inciting tension in communities. This nonsense has to stop. We surely need to get back to the principle of policing and justice, which is simply to do it on a balanced and even-handed, equitable way.
Without fear or favour is the term that
yes.
Robert Peel used, and that's exactly what we need to do.
But we're not doing that, Chris, are we?
But can I say that this really, it didn't start with the Stephen Lawrence issue and the ongoing, you know, naming of police as being institutionally racist. It didn't start there, but that has had a big effect on policing, and it's had a big effect on society, I think. And I think, you know, if you were, just ask yourself, if you were a police officer and you knew it was going to bring all types of grief on you, if you conducted what you think is a very appropriate stop and search and didn't find something and then were labelled as a racist because of it, you just would shy away from it. And police officers do have the ability to either go to the areas where all the problems are, or to go to another area where it's nice and safe and don't have to get involved in these things. And if we want our police officers to help to solve the problems of our city centres, then we need to support them and back them up. And they are going to make mistakes. There's no doubt about that.
But we need senior police officers, you know, those that seem to be drafted in that are increasingly woke, those that are drafted in that have had an academic career, probably never walked the beat in their lives. We need them to be replaced by, you know, good old-fashioned coppers that understand common sense. And for them, it's the senior police officers that need to support the rank and file, rather than looking to trip them up with some ridiculously overt DEI agenda.
Well, one of the biggest issues, I think, is the politicisation of the police. And, you know, these police crime commissioners, when that was brought in, it brought the police into effectively being managed and overseen by a specific politician.
When they were brought in,
they weren't supposed to be party political, but actually that's what's happened. They're either Conservative, they're Labour, or they're Liberal.
Chris, would you agree with me that the introduction of police and crime commissioners, and I know some of them, was an absolute waste of time and money? They don't do anything. They don't hold anybody to account. They are not held to account. Last time I looked, in Essex, where Roger Hurst is the police and crime commissioner, who I think has certain questions to answer, particularly when it comes to Alison Pearson and his false doorstepping journalists. I mean, he had something like a 17% turnout in his election. So 83% of the electorate ignored the fact that he was up for election. I mean, they are completely inconsequential, aren't they, police and crime commissioners?
Inconsequential, but in as much as they don't
Let's get rid of them. Let's get rid of them.
Yeah, absolutely. They should never have been brought in the first place. It was a disastrous decision. One of many, actually, made by David Cameron and the Home Office at the time. It's a complete nonsense. You know, return policing to as it was. OK, it's never going to be perfect. But I can tell you now, 20 years ago, the police in this country was seen as being in the top echelons of police across the world. It's not anymore.
No, but it's not now. Can we just turn to the subject of parents? Are you a parent, Chris?
I am, yeah. Yeah.
How many kids you got?
And a grandparent.
Are you? OK, so your kids are grown up. Can you imagine a situation where one of your children has a crossbow, a zombie knife and a Tupperware tub full of rice in under their bed and you wouldn't know about it?
No, I mean, it's quite incredible, the lack of parenting. I mean, you know, this is a much bigger thing, I think, but actually we have come to the stage now where kids seem to rule the household in many families across the world.
They do, and maybe parents are scared of them, you know, particularly if they know that they're carrying knives around. But in this
not only scared of them, but actually have given the power over to their kids.
And the same with social services, you know, perhaps, you know, turning a blind eye because of wokeness. The same with schools that are scared to do anything because every kid now knows that they can just scream abuse or, you know, they did this, they did that, and then, you know, the parents, of course, always back up the child in school. So schools have just put their hands up and said, look, there's no point trying trying to discipline kids anymore because we're in a hiding to nothing. But let's think about Axel Rudicabaner's parents, who of course have now moved. They're in hiding, apparently. What consequences do you think they should bear? What accountability for the fact that A, they brought this monster up, and a question mark there in terms of, you know, and again, I'm no psychologist, but how much responsibility they bear there in terms of how he turned out. But specifically to the question of, they knew exactly what he was up to. You know, there are stories that a week before the actual Southport atrocity, Axel Rudicabaner had to be pulled out of a taxi by his father because he knew that he was on his way to commit an offence at his former school. Weapons, ricin, Al-Qaeda manuals in his bedroom. Either the parents should have known. If they didn't, they're certainly very, very negligent. But if parents have an idea that their child is an absolute wrong-un, that is going to hurt other members of society. And by the way, the other thing that Axel Rudicabaner apparently did was to call the child line number and say to the person that answered the phone, can you please help me? I'm going to kill someone. That came out in evidence yesterday. Parents, his parents, must have been aware of him and his behaviour. How much accountability should they now hold, maybe criminally, for allowing him to carry on and commit those murders and attempted murders in Southport?
Well, there's always a lot that happens behind the scenes, and it's difficult to comment specifically on him because I don't know the full facts of him. It's horrendous. I mean, his actions and his actions up until that day actually have been horrendous. I don't know whether or not the parents have been trying to discipline him and found it impossible. I don't know whether he's been reporting them, the parents have been reporting him to social services and had no assistance from them. I don't know. But what I do know is that the general part of this should be that parents are responsible for the actions of their children. And, you know, I've seen some great examples of that in policing over the years where parents really deal with their kids. And I've also seen parents that are completely overwhelmed by their children and have no form of control over them whatsoever.
So it's because, I mean, look, you're right. Morally, of course, they have responsibility, but I'm talking about criminal responsibility. I'm not even sure that the legislation exists. And my question to you, I guess, is, should it exist? Should parents be held criminally culpable for the behaviour of people like Axel Rudicabaner? Because actually, if we want to play the card as had to be played by way of the sentencing guidelines that he was sentenced as a child, well, the last time I looked, anyone under 18 that is still a child is the responsibility of their parents, so that his parents should surely bear some responsibility criminally here, shouldn't they?
Well, criminally wise, if you know someone's going to commit a criminal offence and you don't do anything about it, you do have some criminal responsibility. So that is feasible. We don't know the full story yet, and it's difficult to comment without knowing.
But Chris,
a little bit more.
I don't want to put you on the spot. The parents undoubtedly knew of his intentions and his state of mind. They undoubtedly knew. So why is nobody else, I've not seen this in the media at all apart from on this station, why are the parents not being called out and made culpable? A, so that they have a case to answer, but also as a message to other parents that might have errant, psychopathic, evil children that might do the same as Axel Rudicabaner, as a message to those parents that you've got to shop your son or daughter if they have murderous intent.
Yeah, and it's exactly the same for terrorism offences. You know, if you've got your son looking at, or daughter, looking at terrorism material and becoming radicalised, it must be in your, it must be your job legally to tell the police and let the police deal with it, or let social services deal with it. But let's go on to the next stage, because we don't know exactly how effective, clearly in this case not, the social services were and the police were.
Well, hopeless.
Actually knowing what
they were hopeless.
He was up to.
They were hopeless, all of them. You know, Prevent, I think, actually are off the hook to an extent, because they would say, look, it isn't terrorism. Our terms of reference are terrorism, potential terrorism. But
believe me, they've got enough. They've got enough on their plate.
But social services, schools, parents, police, something should have been done here, not least to have Axel Rudicabaner sectioned under the Mental Health Act. That should have happened. Chris, got to leave it there. Look, thank you very much indeed for that. Great conversation, great debate. We're going to take a break now, another break, but when we come back, lots and lots of your calls on this very subject. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk. Back after this.
The fact that Keir Starmer hasn't even picked up the phone to the president it's an absolute disgrace, and it doesn't instill much confidence in international relations.
He's not even in the top 10 of countries that Donald Trump wants to talk to. Yesterday, he had a conversation with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, in where we extracted $600 billion out of him. Starmer's just looking more and more irrelevant, isn't he?
It's not the great power that it once was, and, you know, we're an international laughingstock, Mike.
It's obviously a very horrid situation for everybody. There is some disquiet, is there not, at the very least, about the way that the authorities have handled all of this.
At the moment, I think people here are just in that panicked fight or flight mode. It really is. You're in the lap of the gods. Everybody's on edge. Nobody feels safe.
As you know, where I live is on fire right now. Literally, the entire city of the Pacific Palisades is burning.
Any message from you to Governor Newsom?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk in for Alex Phillips, who, of course, will be back. In fact, she's back in tomorrow, as I understand. I think she's 10 till 1 tomorrow and Sunday. So I'm here till 1 o'clock, and so are you, by the looks of it. Lots and lots of your calls. Thank you. Many of you have called 0344 499 1000 with comment, opinion, and so on. Lots of text messages. I'll get some of those later on as well. But first, let's go to Paul in Newport. Paul, thanks for calling Talk.
That's okay. Good to speak to you, Russell.
Yeah, and you. Thanks, mate.
It's sooner or later, okay, we're going to have one of these grown-up conversations. And when I say we, I mean whichever government's in at the time.
Yeah.
There are people out there that are wired wrong, okay? That's just how they are. We've got to accept that they are. Now, we're not. It's not alien for us to have these conversations, because not too many moons ago, we decided that the XL bully was too dangerous to be out there. And we systematically set out to eradicate an entire breed from the UK.
Yeah.
Because we decided wrong. So at what point do we say, OK, then, just as there was the XL bully, there are equally people that fall into that dangerous to society category?
But you're not suggesting we deal with them in the same way, I hope, Paul?
Well, I actually think on the sort of death penalty thing, I think what will happen in the end, because these things always come down to money. So that Muppet that went yesterday, he'll be there for 52 years. That's about £11.5 million that we're going to spend on him. That's not allowed in for inflation. So you're looking at £11.5 million to keep him in, wherever you keep him, for 52 years.
Yeah.
If we start adding the numbers up and say, actually, there'll come a point where there are so many of these people that we're now into, like, an annual spend of, like, 10 billion quid a year, that's when we'll decide we can't afford to do it, and we'll come up probably with something like the death penalty.
So Paul, I was talking to Anne Widdecombe earlier about the reasons that we should consider reinstating the death penalty, and I think, one is very much it being a deterrent, and we had the debate as to whether it is or isn't, and Anne Widdecombe certainly put a very, very strong case forward in terms of evidence in the aftermath of the death penalty being ceased back in the 1960s, that it is a deterrent. Then there's the revenge/vengeance, I don't want this individual on the planet anymore argument. Then there's the argument that we don't want them ever to come out of prison, and of course we have a situation here with Axel Rudakabana where he could be out on the streets when he's 69 to 70 years old. But you're talking about it from an economic point of view, and I get that, but my slight caution, Paul, is, do we then say the same of, I don't know, old people with dementia? Are you suggesting that euthanasia on the basis, are you saying it's the same thing?
Absolutely not. And just to jump back to the revenge thing, don't confuse revenge with the demand for justice. That's a wrong thing to do, okay? Revenge and the demand for justice are two different things. Sometimes you're going to say, you just want revenge, and someone else is going to say, no, in my opinion, justice in this occasion is the death penalty. But don't forget, even in the Bible it says an eye for an eye, so again, this is nothing new.
But are justice and revenge mutually exclusive? Are they not just two sides of the same coin?
Well, there's probably sort of things that merge in the middle. There comes a point where where revenge becomes justice, or also justice becomes revenge, and vice versa. But I think there will be many people out there, particularly with disregard for what happened, yesterday, where they're saying the only course of real justice is that he's removed.
But to make us all feel better about the crimes that he committed, which is kind of revenge. And look, I'm not criticising it. I totally understand the human emotion, Paul.
In part,
totally understand it.
In part, isn't it? It's not about making us feel better. In part, it's about us making us feel safer. Okay, if you know that there's something in society that says, okay, then if this happens, this is the consequence, and therefore I'm safer by virtue of that confidence. We just feel that there's something better in society.
Do you think if a poll was taken, and maybe we can do this actually, if a poll was taken of Britain today, the majority of people, in the wake of the sentencing yesterday and the revolting details that came out in that sentencing process yesterday,
and that's the thing.
Do you think if that poll was taken today, the vast majority of the British public would now be in favour of the death penalty?
Well, let me just add something to your poll. If your poll was, should that person, that I don't even want to say his name because I think we shouldn't say his name because it just should that person be put to death? I think the poll would be probably 70% would say yes for that person. That's not to say bring it back, for everything, but for that particular case yesterday, which was so brutal, so absolutely horrific. I don't think there would be many people that say actually anything other than take him out. Now, whether he goes with a noose or a needle, no one really cares.
Yeah. Well, look, we should do that, and I suspect there will be multiple polls on this subject starting today, particularly because people like Anne Widdecombe, who I spoke to earlier, put such a very convincing case forward for it. And of course, we've heard from Reform MPs, certainly from Lee Anderson and Rupert Lowe already, that they, in their words, would like to see Axel Rudakabana hang. OK, Paul, thank you very much indeed. Let's just go to a voice note. We've got another call in a second, but Rob wants to talk about the death penalty in this voice note.
Good morning, Russell. Great show. I totally agree with your previous caller when she explained about the death penalty for him. That it's like, in a way, he's escaped punishment, really. Because, like she says, in prison, this thing, I can't even call it a man because it's not a man. God knows, it's subhuman. Is not going to get a minute's peace within the prison walls. He's always going to be a target because they hate kiddie killers in prison. And his whole life, he's going to be having to look over his shoulder constantly. And so, leave him alive and let him suffer that way, because I think she's spot on with what she said.
Yeah, that was the caller that said that he should be allowed to rot in prison because he'll get a far harder time there. But also, let's put this into perspective as well. We did have a comment yesterday from the mother of Elsie Stankham, one of the murdered 3 girls, who wrote, "He took our daughter, her life, her future, and everything she could have been. There is no greater loss and no greater pain. His actions have left us with a lifetime of grief, and it is only right that he faces the same." And the parents then of Alice Da Silva Aguiar, who is one of the other girls who was aged 9, who was also murdered, said, "Our life went with her. He took us too. 6 months of continuous pain and a lifetime sentence of it." That really puts it into perspective, doesn't it? Let's go to the phones again. Lorraine in Chelmsford. Lorraine, how are you doing?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Russell. Thanks for taking my call.
Pleasure.
For me, the crux of the matter is, which is destroying the fabric of society in this country, sorry for my throat, is the ideology of those within our civil service and the Home Office. I believe that we have many activists that work within our Home Office and with the research, information and communication unit.
Are you suggesting, do you think that the hierarchy of our public organisations has been taken over by the liberal left?
I would say Marxist. I really do. That's what I believe. I think we have activists that work within our Home Office and our civil society that are actually intent on destroying our country. Because we see it. You say 2-tier policing. We certainly have that. I think that they have sympathies with certain demographics within this country to the detriment of everybody else.
So you think?
I mean,
let's name
sorry?
a few. So we think the Department of Justice, as such, our judicial system, our police, our NHS, border force, Home Office, our education system, but certainly, education, border, and police. You think that there are agendas within the senior management of those organisations that are counter to our politicians and counter to the wishes of the public. I mean, that doesn't sound very democratic, does it, Lorraine?
I don't think we are in a democracy anymore. And I would also add there the majority of our mainstream media. It's a narrative that's being sent out.
Not us, Lorraine.
No, not you. I would say not you, and another station as well.
There are no other stations, but anyway, moving on quickly.
It would depend on who the presenters are.
Right.
But there was a leaked document out of the Home Office, actually, from the Research, Information and Communication Unit, an extremism and terrorism report that said the grooming gangs are used as a grievance narrative by the right-wing extremism.
So let's just put that into perspective. So you think that the liberal left and the liberal media, it's akin to what Keir Starmer's doing, really, which is to say all of those that criticise us on the left, Labour government, or those of a left-leaning liberal nature, again, it's back to us all being far-right thugs in an attempt to silence us from trying to destroy the woke narrative that has infiltrated our public organisations. So if that is the case, and I'm definitely not disagreeing with you, because I definitely do agree with you, and I think it's pretty sinister, particularly when it comes to universities, our education system, police and our justice system. How do we weed out these, as you call them, these activists? How do we do that? Do we need a kind of Trumpian revolution, someone to come along, whether it's Reform or Kemi Badenoch or an other, to weed out these lefty activists that actually seem to have taken control of our country by stealth?
Well, I think, first of all, we should look at the courses they go on. They're indoctrinated by DEI courses, critical race theory courses, and also common purpose courses.
Common purpose? I don't even know what that means.
Common Purpose was an organisation started up by a lady called Julia Middleton. And it is what it says. It says to rule above their authority. Actually, Brian Gerrish has written a lot on this common purpose courses
would we see that? Are you, like I am, old enough to remember the likes of Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister? Are you suggesting that this is, let's say, civil servants that are specifically trying to manipulate their politician bosses effectively so that they can govern as they want rather than the mandate that the politician has?
Absolutely. You've heard of the long march through the institutions. Well, I think we're there.
Yeah. Wow, very sinister. We do need a Trumpian revolution, don't we? Lorraine Chelmsford, brilliant. Thank you very much indeed for calling. That was fascinating. Keep your calls coming, 0344 499 1000. After the break, we're going to be talking to Tony Moss. Look, this is going to be emotional, I suspect. He is a cousin of Emily Damari, one of the very recently released British hostages in Gaza. And more of those hostages being released tomorrow. We're going to talk about that after this break. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Okay, welcome back. Look, despite the hideous, evil, horrendous news that has dominated this station and I'm sure all others over the last 24 hours, the sentencing and the kind of aftermath of that of Axel Rudiker-Barnett, there is other news about. And what we must always keep in mind is the plight of Israeli hostages and the fact that there are still some incarcerated, although some, of course, as part of the deal that has been done over the last few days are being released. A total of 33 hostages being released. Some have not yet been. Some are going to be named today by Hamas for release tomorrow. But of course, one of the releases of hostages in the last few days was Emily Damari, who of course is a joint British-Israeli citizen. And I'm delighted to say that joining me now is Tony Moss, her cousin. Tony, thank you very much indeed for joining me. I'm honoured.
You're welcome. Thank you, Russell.
How is she?
She's amazing. We're shocked at how well she's doing. Thank you. She's an amazing spirit. She's really strong. She's resilient. You can see her smile there. We always knew she was a strong young lady, and we understood she kept the spirits of the other hostages up as well. From the ones that were released, they said that she was the one that was singing to them and keeping positive throughout her ordeal. And I think that's how she survived, because she's just an amazing character.
And, I mean, so she's been out just for a few days after 15 months in captivity. Obviously more hostages to be released. I mean, what has she... Have you spoken to her directly, I presume?
I've spoken to her mum, Mandy, actually. Yeah. I've left Emily alone. She's in care in hospital. She's getting the treatment she needs.
Understandable.
Both psychological and physical, because she was shot in the hand and shot in the leg on October the 7th, 23. So no, I've not spoken to her. I've spoken to her mum.
And the circumstances are, Tony, that she was taken from her apartment on October the 7th, wasn't she?
Yeah, she lived in an apartment on a kibbutz called Kibbutz Kfar Aza, near the Gaza border. I visited there last year with her mum, and they broke into her apartment. They shot her in the hand, as I said, blasted 2 of her fingers off, shot her dog dead, and kidnapped her in her own car to the terror tunnels in Gaza, where she's been for 471 days, along with some friends of hers. And a lot of people from that kibbutz either died or were kidnapped that day.
Yeah, and we don't know the extent of that, of course. I think there's something like 98 hostages that were still missing. And, of course, the first tranche of this deal, this Israeli-Hamas deal, releasing 33, of which she was the first tranche. So, obviously, more to come. We don't know the extent of the deaths as a percentage of those that are still held.
This is part of the psychological warfare that Hamas provide. There's 94 remaining. There was 98. 1 came back dead, unfortunately, last week, and 3 alive, including Emily, and Daron, and Romy. And this is part of the psychological torture. We didn't know until Sunday morning that Emily was going to be released on Sunday because it was delayed. I got a text on the family group from Mandy, her mother, just saying, going to pick Emily up, hopefully alive. We didn't know whether she was alive or dead until she got back over the border.
You didn't know until you saw her?
They didn't know whether she was coming back alive or dead until we saw the same footage as you just showed of Emily in Hamas vehicles surrounded by mobs of Hamas terrorists. And when she was
goading, bullying, insulting,
exactly.
An absolutely disgraceful scene.
And we still don't know who's dead or alive out of the 33 that are on the list to be released, apart from the 3 that have now come out. And we don't know, and the families of the others, of the 94 who are not on that list of 33, who are just waiting. It's torturous. This is the psychological warfare that, unfortunately, negotiating with terrorists involves.
Well, by nature, they are an evil organisation. And, of course, the quid pro quo here is that they will also have their prisoners. And I'm saying prisoners, not hostages, because Hamas terrorists in prison are not hostages. They are prisoners. They are all going to be released. How do you feel about that?
Look, it's a really difficult moral dilemma, because we know that Sinwar was originally a prisoner of Israel and was released, and he was given a life-saving brain operation, most people don't know, before the Israelis released him.
Well, by Israel?
And he ended up, yes, by Israel when he was in prison, because Israel is a democracy. Israel treats their prisoners in the same way as the UK does. There's a democratic process. There's rights of appeal. They look after their prisoners. Israel is a humane Western democracy, and there's a huge difference. They are prisoners. They have been arrested or convicted of crimes, and there's a huge difference. We should not put them on the same pedestal as there's innocent women and children. There's babies who are still hostages of Hamas, the Bibas babies, Kafir and Bibas, who celebrated his second birthday, hopefully, if he's alive, last Saturday. His first birthday was as a hostage by Hamas. He's never had a birthday out of captivity. We cannot compare. And your question is a very difficult moral dilemma of what price do we get these hostages home? And it's a really difficult question. There's no right answer because we don't know what crimes these terrorists are going to go on and commit in the future. But obviously, I'm overjoyed to have Emily back in her mother's arms.
Of course. And I would guess, though, Tony, that the human element must prevail. So getting the hostages back, I think, must be the priority, even if the price is those Hamas terrorists, as they are released. But I suspect, and obviously I have no inside knowledge on this, I suspect the moment they are released, when the Israeli hostages are protected, are back home, that those Hamas prisoners that are being released as part of the deal will be hounded down.
I hope so. I hope so. I want peace like everybody else wants, but
yeah, and by the way, I don't know if you've been listening to the show. We've been talking a lot about vengeance and revenge with regard to this similarly evil monster, Axel Ruder-Cabana, of course, here. It's similarly, I guess. Look, it's I hate to compare the two, but they are.
There is a comparison.
Well, there is. They are very, very similar. But
there's a related issue here, and that is if we let Hamas get away with what they're getting away with. It's coming over here. It's coming over here.
Yeah. Let's talk quickly about conditions. Now, I don't know what you're party to, but and again, I don't want this to be upsetting for you. So tell me if you don't want to go there. But what were the conditions that Emily was held in? What has she recounted so far in terms of how she was held?
Yeah, no, I can't share anything of that nature. She's being debriefed by intelligence. In Israel, and they were terrible conditions. But yeah, it's not something I've got a large insight into or can go into, I'm afraid. But we're just delighted that she's back in her mother's arms.
I think we can assume that they were not particularly salubrious conditions.
No, and the fact is, it's the unknown conditions. It's the families that have got. There's 94 other hostages. Their families do not know what conditions they're being kept in. They do not know whether they got access to food or water and hygiene. It's the unknown that is the psychological torture, and whether these hostages themselves are alive or dead, and whether they know whether their families are alive or survived October the 7th, 2023. This is the psychological torture, not just about what conditions they're being kept in, whether they're being moved around or not, or whether they're in tunnels or in people's houses. The fact is, the whole thing isn't. It's just torturous for all concerned.
And do you think the Israeli state is still right to pursue, at all costs now, the eradication of Hamas?
We've got to get the eradication of Hamas. As I say, Israel is a democracy. They're surrounded by Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in the north. The whole region is surrounded by terrorists who are part of governments, and it's a horrific situation, and we've just got to get rid of these evil people in order to have peace and prosperity.
Well, and because they've said very, very clearly, Tony, that they won't live side by side with Israelis, whereas Israelis say quite the opposite, quite happy, under the right circumstances to be able to do such. How on earth can you make peace or countenance an organisation, a country, a people that are hell-bent on the destruction of their neighbours and have said very clearly that they will not live alongside them under any circumstances?
That's what's really difficult. Israelis want peace. The Israelis are a peaceful nation. They want to live in peace, and it's really difficult when you're surrounded by terrorist organisations who want the eradication and the complete destruction of the Jewish people and the state of Israel.
Indeed.
And the other thing that just to finish on is, you get people marching with some of these people who have signs up saying gays for Palestine, and the whole thing is so ironic because the biggest gay march in is in Tel Aviv. It's one of the most diverse, beautiful, liberal cities in the world.
Well, of course, look, if you were to display your homosexuality in front of anyone from Hamas, you would you would be thrown off a building.
Exactly.
Tony Moss, I'm very, very grateful to you for joining us. Thank you for that. I know that must have been difficult. And best wishes to Emily, of course, and indeed to the hostages that are all about to be released, hopefully all of them alive. Going to take a break now. When we come back, we're going to be talking to Greg Swenson in the studio, chair of Republicans overseas, about Trump, Davos, etc. This is Russell Quirk. I'm here talking to you from Talk. Back in a sec. What would be your position in terms of how we would even begin to think about administrating something like the death penalty? I mean, how would we do it?
I haven't got the answer to that, Mike, but I do think there's reasons now to have a serious national debate for reintroducing the death penalty in exceptional circumstances, and I think this is an exceptional circumstance, so I would listen to all the arguments and then make a decision, and I think that's how good government should work.
The fact that Keir Starmer hasn't even picked up the phone to the president it's an absolute disgrace, and it doesn't instill much confidence in international relations.
He's not even in the top 10 of countries that Donald Trump wants to talk to. Yesterday, he had a conversation with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, where he extracted $600 billion out of him. Starmer's just looking more and more irrelevant, isn't he?
It's not the great power that it once was.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm delighted to say that I'm now joined in the studio by Greg Swenson, chair of Republicans overseas. So you're going to get a taste of an American accent live from here, Talk Towers in the centre of London. Greg, welcome.
Great to be here, Russell.
How you doing?
Great.
Yeah, I should say, yeah how you doing? Let's talk about what's going on in the United States. Trump's first week has been a busy one, I think it's fair to say. Executive orders left, right and centre. But in particular, I want to talk about one of them that seeks to cease the birthright. So in other words, if I think undocumented, unlawful immigrants are in the United States have a child, at the moment that child would get United States birthrights. They would become a US citizen. He is attempting to halt that but there seems to be an element of the judiciary, back to the point we were making just now, where, perhaps, I would argue, an overtly liberal judiciary is saying, oh, no, we think that's perfectly OK to come over here as an illegal immigrant, have kids, and they then have US citizenship, which is probably why most of them come over in the first place. What is this about?
Yeah, well, I think part of it is whether it's constitutional or not. And you can have a view, and in fact, the judge who actually stopped stopped it yesterday was a Reagan appointee. So,
right.
It's not.
So he's on the right.
It's not necessarily partisan, although a lot of Reagan appointees ended up disappointing later.
Right.
Even that.
Well, they pretended to be
Court
right-wing and actually ended up being left-wing.
That's right, and so they sort of change over time, but. In this case, it's typical with President Trump. Everyone on the left and in the corporate media will call him a racist, and he's, anti-immigrant, all untrue.
Yeah.
And you think about the countries that Jennifer Ewing pointed this out, a friend of the show, that since 1980, Australia in 2007, New Zealand, Ireland, France, India, UK, and Portugal have all done the same thing.
Yeah.
Nobody called them racist.
Well, I don't remember any media calling that out. So what's he done exactly? So it's preventing illegal immigrants coming over and having children and them being automatically American citizens. But judges, and actually this judge, I guess, representing multiple states. I think there's a number of states which presumably would be generally left-leaning Democrat states.
They typically are, and but these districts are funny. The judges in certain districts are completely leftist, and that makes it really difficult to get some sort of law through the courts or changes. However, the argument might also be that the president just can't do this, and it's
because it's against the Constitution.
It has to be run through Congress, and that's what Biden was accused of quite a bit, and he was wrong almost all the time. He was doing things that by executive order that he couldn't get passed through Congress. He couldn't pass a law.
So just to be clear, in terms of
is go to Congress.
So in terms of the US process, an executive order from the president, of which Trump has ordered many in this first few days since he was inaugurated on Monday, doesn't, forgive the saying, doesn't trump the Constitution, Congress, Senate, and the other executive arms of the US legislature.
That's right.
So he can't just do what he wants.
In some areas they can, in some areas they can't. So the border, because it's the border and it's sort of national security, there's a lot more power in the executive branch for a president. Whereas something like this, birthright citizenship, that might perhaps have to go to the Congress and be passed. And so
to Supreme Court potentially.
It ultimately will get to the Supreme Court.
Which will take ages, take years.
It could. They're funny. They can move things up to into the front of the queue, and they typically meet in the summer.
Yeah.
So it could take until June.
But of course, look, one of the reasons Trump is doing this is presumably as a deterrent to illegal immigrants.
Absolutely.
So there's an element of politics here, an element of prevention. So on the other side of the aisle, why would the Democrats favour there not being a deterrent?
Because they're Democrats, because the party's been taken over by the radical progressive left, and so anytime they can get illegal migrants into the country, they'll take that in spite of the sex trafficking, in spite of the fentanyl that's killing 100,000 Americans a year.
It mirrors what we're doing here. And, under
absolutely.
Actually the previous government, is inarguable, but certainly under this. But why do the left favour this? All refugees welcome, no matter who you are or what you've done, whether you're anonymous or not, you're all welcome. Why are they so fixated with that philosophy?
One argument is that they're future Democrat voters. The other is that they increase the population so that when the census is taken every 10 years, so the next one's in 2030, there'll be greater populations in the sanctuary cities, the blue states, so there'll be more congressional seats and more electoral votes.
But if it's
destructive to the country, they don't care.
Well, and
they don't mind
this
that.
weird fixation here that all immigration is good from an economic point of view, which it isn't. Before you go, JFK. So this is fascinating. So the assassination of JFK was 1963. So we're a long way away on from that. It looks like Trump is going to order today the release of all of the documents relating to that. Very quickly, what do you expect to see?
I suspect it could be disappointing.
You just think nothing?
It could be.
So why have they been held back for 60 years?
Because that's the way they are. They like to keep things secret. I mean, look what happened in COVID. They censored any
What's next?
argument
The UFO files?
You know, it could be next. But, you know, look, you know, they don't want the people to know everything. And that's what happened with the lockdowns.
Trump being populist
censoring
here.
the Great Barrington Declaration.
Trump being populist here, I think. So,
Yeah.
Greg, look, wonderful. Thank you very much. It's been a fleeting visit. Sorry, I know you'll be around again soon. Many thanks indeed for
Great
that.
to be here, Russell.
And your wonderful insight from across the pond. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk. I'll be back after this break and the news.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. Just gone midday. I'm here for another hour. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk. I'm in for Alex Phillips. Coming up, of course, Eowyn Collins at 1 o'clock. That'll be handing over to in just under an hour's time. Lots of guests to get through in the next hour. Lots of calls as well. Keep them coming. 0344 499 1000 with anything you want to say about anything that we're talking about, or maybe anything we're not talking about. Tell us if there's something that we should be talking about that's on your mind. 0344 499 1000, or indeed you can text us 87222 plus the word Talk. Let's talk now to James Price, former Chief of Staff and Senior Special Advisor to the Chancellor of the Exchequer. What a title, James.
Quite a mouthful, isn't it? How did you say? You well today?
Yeah. Look, I'm good under the circumstance. Obviously, we had this weird dynamic here at this station where there's lots and lots of news around, particularly, obviously, the sentencing of the evil Axel Ruda-Kubana. So it's busy, lots going on, but it's not nice news to be talking about. And unfortunately, with you, I'm going to have to continue to talk about it. Let me first get your reaction to the sentence yesterday, and whether you agree with a lot of our callers and a lot of the people on social media that are contacting us saying, yes, we know he was under 18, but we really do need to change those sentencing guidelines so that someone that commits an adult crime, as he has, is sentenced as an adult. And that's certainly Kemi Badenoch's approach, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, until I think it was 2003, the Home Secretary would have the power to alter specific sentencing cases, like for these sorts of particularly heinous and horrible crimes. And you can no longer do that because of Britain's participation in, you guessed it, the ECHR. So we would have been able to avoid some of this this debate, because the Home Secretary would have been able to say, look, this person is so obviously guilty. They pled guilty. They've obviously said, I'm glad that these girls are dead. These horrible, horrible things that happened. This is somebody who should never be allowed out of prison. I frankly think, though, that there is perhaps even scope for frankly, a conversation about the return of capital punishment for somebody like this. I mean, I really don't quite see the morality of someone who is so very obviously an evil person being kept alive at the taxpayers' expense.
And because that would be a deterrent, or because that would be a deterrent, James, or because that would make us feel better about ridding the planet of him as such an evil individual. Which one of those, or is it both?
I think for cases like this, I wonder whether it would act as a deterrent. I'm not sure that would be the main reason. I do think, though, that because what they've done is so evil and the hope of any kind of rehabilitation is so obviously remote, that the idea of spending huge amounts of money to keep this person alive, when that money could be better spent in hospitals or in schools or in people's pockets. I know it's a very slippery slope to go down, but since this government has started to allow the debate around assisted dying to happen, and where you've got proponents of that talking about it being a cost-saving measure, it seems weird that we're not allowed to put to death one of the most evil people ever seen in this country, but we are allowed to do it to Granny. So I guess the conversation there.
The question would be from the left. They'd say, well, you know, we are a civilised society, so we can't possibly be so barbaric as to take another life. But I think I agree with that to a point. But I think there are exceptions. I really, really do. And I think Axel Rudiger absolutely fits into the exception case because of the severity of his crimes, because of the evil nature, because of the lack of remorse, because of I'm sure, the inability, the unlikelihood of him being rehabilitated even over the next 51 or 52 years. And the fact actually that he's under 18, I also don't think he should be precluded from facing the death penalty. James, can we just go back to something that we said, which we should not gloss over? I think you're the first person to kind of point this out, really, and without getting too political about this, but it is, I think, a really important point. We talk about the ECHR and its inappropriateness and its ability to be manipulated by clever liberal lawyers, and that is one of the reasons the ECHR, and it's linked to the Human Rights Act, which of course Tony Blair brought in 1998. We talk about that a lot, and that constraining us in Britain, particularly when it comes to removing rapists and murderers from this country that otherwise should be deported. But you're the first person I've heard say, and I'm not challenging you on the basis that I don't believe it, but I think it's absolutely astonishing that effectively what we're saying here is that our inclusion, us being wedded to the ECHR, effectively may have stopped Axel Rudiger getting a whole of life sentence.
Well, not necessarily the whole life sentence, but that the Home Secretary could intervene to increase it.
Well, there you go. There you go. So Yvette Cooper would now today, so after yesterday, so Justice Goose doing as good a job, it would seem, as he possibly could given the sentencing guidelines. What we're now saying is that if we weren't wedded to the ECHR, today Yvette Cooper would now be under pressure to change that sentence, and could do so if it were not for the ECHR. That's what we're saying.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think it goes to a wider problem we've got around sentencing in general. I didn't realise until quite recently that there's something called the Sentencing Council that sort of sits separately from the Ministry of Justice, and is a bunch of people who get to sort of decide, oh, actually, let's have some more ameliorating circumstances for this, or we've got to perhaps consider someone's background when they do these horrible crimes, and, all these sorts of mitigations.
And James, guess who used to sit on that?
I dread to think. Go on, tell me.
Keir Starmer.
Yeah, of course he did. Well, here we go. And so I think that this should spur a wider conversation as well about sentencing. And we're fortunate that not every single case is as completely barbaric as the one that we've had to all learn about recently. But for so many crimes that happen now, the sentences are just laughably short. You're getting almost as short a time in prison for committing rape, if you're a member of one of these Pakistani paedophile rape gangs, as you are for writing mean things on Facebook.
And James, just for balance, let's throw Hugh Edwards into the mix as well, shall we?
Absolutely, you name it. I think for most of these people who are not the clear monsters that Rudy Cabana is, stronger sentences will provide bigger deterrence. But if you only give people very short sentences and they yo-yo back and forth in and out of jail, knowing that it's not that bad, that's no deterrence at all. And most crimes are committed by people who have a very long rap sheet of many convictions. We're literally talking about hundreds of convictions per person. Now, those are not people that we need to have in our society, and that we need to catch these people earlier. And frankly, I think the time has come, for a while at least, to just throw away the key. And that even counts in this Rudy Cabana case, where he was referred to prevent several times. He was found with a knife 10 times and not put in prison.
At school, not just found with a knife, but at school.
Yeah.
I know, absolutely unbelievable.
Extraordinary, the failures that have happened. And yet, but because the state doesn't want to talk about its own failures, and it also doesn't want to talk about the fact that, as the son of Rwandan immigrants, what factor that may or may not have had in terms of
James, we raised that here about an hour and a half ago. Does his connection to Rwanda and the fact that it is the most infamous place for genocide, almost the most infamous place for genocide in history, probably second only to the Nazis in the Second World War and their eradication of the Jewish population, or almost entire eradication of the Jewish population by way of the Holocaust. Is there a connection there in terms of his psyche, his enthusiasm, if you like, some trigger that allowed him to become so obviously murderous? And when I say obviously murderous, this is an individual that didn't just murder and attempt to murder many, many more. He studied such things. He became a scholar of death, a scholar of such atrocities. So do we think that the Rwanda connection is something that we should be investigating a bit more?
Absolutely right. I think that it's come across that some of the materials that he had on him and some of the utterances that he made, talking about how England needs a, quote, white genocide, like what happened in Rwanda. I think that's a verbatim quote that came out, that he said to one of his school friends. Maybe school friends is not quite the right word, and that he was obsessed with all this kind of literature that's out there that talks about how, white people are terrible, uniquely terrible in the world, and all of this sort of stuff. Now, I do think that we need to have those sorts of very difficult, unpleasant conversations. Instead, what is the state doing? It's saying, oh, it's Amazon's fault because he bought a knife off Amazon. Well, is it also Tesco's fault if he happened to have gone and had a meal deal beforehand? I mean, it is ludicrous to try and deflect in such a cack-handed and disrespectful way when we need...
And that displays, I think, Keir Starmer's absolute woeful lack of judgment, doesn't it? That in the aftermath of this, when it was revealed earlier this week that, yes, he'd bought a knife on Amazon. And by the way, you can still do that. I didn't try and buy it, but I searched for zombie knife on Amazon yesterday. You can still buy one. But and I have to say to you, James, that when I saw that pop up at £37.50 for a zombie knife, it did not make me want to buy it and go out and kill anybody. So the fact that the blame for such crimes can be laid at Amazon's door, or anybody else's for that matter, is utterly preposterous. Let's go back to the death penalty thing. Are you in favour of it? And have you changed your mind? Are you in favour of it now but were not previously to this case?
I certainly think over the course of several years, I've gone from a position that you outlined very well earlier on that said, no, we're far too civilized to do this, we're far too enlightened and all of these sorts of things. I think it's a lot less clear-cut now. And I think that for this case, I would be sorely tempted by it. And I'd be interested in seeing whether it works in the kind of academic literature in other countries where it happens as a deterrence for other cases as well. Because we know that deterrence does work and that proper long, nasty prison sentences do deter lots of people. You and I think have talked about El Salvador before. It was the murder capital of the world, the most dangerous country on earth because of all the drug gangs and the violence that they cause. And they go and they lock all the nasty people up and suddenly, boom, it's the safest country in the Western Hemisphere ahead of Canada and America.
Yes, because funnily enough, even when it's not heinous murderers and drug dealers, at pretty much all levels, the majority of crime in neighbourhoods in particular will actually be committed by a very, very small number of people. So if you either ignore them or you take them through the justice system and let them back out again, guess what happens? They continue to commit crime. But if you lock them up, then yes, guess what? Crime falls. It's not genius, is it? Can we just talk about Keir Starmer a little bit more? Because there's been a lot of criticism, and there was at the time, of Keir Starmer visiting Southport. If you remember that video of him walking up and laying a wreath, being heckled actually by the crowd, actually I think amongst them relatives of the three girls that were murdered. And he spent precisely 19 seconds. Those of you watching on YouTube now will see exactly those scenes that were filmed back in the summer. So he spent 19 seconds in Southport paying, and again I will use my big inverted commas, tribute and respect to the girls that were killed, and indeed the those that were attempted to be murdered by this evil individual. Keir Starmer then drove, or was driven, straight back to Downing Street, and guess what he did, James? He attended a party in Downing Street that looks like it was a celebration of Labour's election victory, including members of the front bench and party donors. That party went on despite the fact that just a day or two previously 3 little girls had been murdered, despite the fact that Keir Starmer spent 19 seconds in Southport. That party, we've researched this, was scheduled to last for 2 hours, so 378 times longer, the celebration of the Labour Party victory, versus the 19 seconds that Keir Starmer spent at Southport paying respects. What do you think about that rather ill-advised, poor optics imbalance between paying respect to Southport itself and those girls versus rushing back to London to drink champagne to celebrate Labour's victory in the general election a couple of weeks previously?
Yeah, it's obviously, what's the phrase? It's not a good look, to say the very, very least, especially when they were so, I won't say the word, so hypocritical and so holier than thou about Boris and having a bit of cake during COVID, right? They hounded Boris Johnson out of office for having a bit of cake, and then they go and do this. The one thing I would say is that when you are in a position of responsibility like this in government, one of the major challenges, major skills that you need to cultivate is the ability to change tempo, change speed, change topic very, very quickly. You know, one meeting will be about national security, then it will be about education, then it'll be about health, and you've got to be able to kind of go back and forth at different speeds like that. So I understand that the reticence to cancel a big fun event like that lots of people will have been looking forward to and might have been seen to be some light relief after a difficult
James,
day.
this is not changing.
Seconds,
yeah, this is not changing gears. This is not changing gears. Going from a hospital visit, you know, to a steel yard in, you know, in Wales. This is grief. This is anger. This is one of the most heinous crimes that this country has ever seen. And we have to call in yet again. We have to call into question Keir Starmer and his advisors' judgment, their political judgment. I mean, even if you don't care that much and think, OK, done that, I've ticked the box, I've been to Southport, let's go and drink some champagne in Downing Street. Surely Keir Starmer himself, as a politician, or one of his advisors, would say, do you know what? We're going to postpone this jolly up, this celebration, this get-together. It's inappropriate. It is completely disrespectful to hold it on the same day as a vigil for 3 murdered little girls.
Yeah, I think that's certainly something that somebody should have said, at least. And if he didn't have people around him who they felt comfortable doing that, he should change up his team. I think the problem is more the fact that it was such a clear, callous tick box exercise. As you say, 19 seconds stood there. And I remember the video at the time being heckled. And, you know, if you're a politician, what's your number one sort of skill set? It's going in, supposed to be talking to the ordinary people, to voters. Yeah. All he had to do was go over to that crowd, soak up all of their hate and their anger and their fear, right? Let them vent at him and say, look, I've only been in the job 5 minutes, which he had been. This is terrible. I was the director of public prosecutions. My job was to put nasty people like this away. Trust me that I'm going to do something about this. I hear your pain and let me fix it. It's all he had to do.
Well, you're right, James. The human element. He could have taken his jacket off, rolled his sleeves up, sat down, spent time with the families, the victims, and the whole of Southport. You know, the community itself may not ever recover from this. He should have embedded himself in that community as a human being. One has to wonder, given the robotic nature of Keir Starmer, whether he really has any compassion or empathy at all. I'm not seeing it. It's certainly not being displayed. Talking about wrong steps and lack of judgment, let's talk about Keir Starmer and what looks to me rather like, James, him kind of taking us back to the EU by stealth through the back door. So he and his advisors, apparently in the last 24 hours, have refused to rule out rejoining an EU customs deal that looks a bit like a customs union, which I think would have to go with, given that the EU give nothing without taking something back, an element of freedom of movement.
Yeah, entirely possibly. I mean, the idea that this is the big priority right now for the country, to try and renegotiate a deal that's only a few years old, knowing the rancor and difficulty and frustration and all of these sorts of things, and knowing, frankly, as well, that the EU is not exactly in a particularly strong position. It's had absolutely no growth for a long time. Its major partner, Germany, its major player, Germany, is, I think, still in recession and has been for a long time. And there's going to be an election in Germany in the next month or two. So there'll be a whole new, most important, powerful person in Europe to have to deal with. Why go and do all of this now? Why go and do this when you've got the United States of America with the most pro-British president we've ever seen in the White House? His own mother, Donald Trump's mother, was British, of course. She was from Scotland.
Scottish, yeah.
Who is desperate to get Britain away from the kind of tariffs that he's going to impose on the rest of the EU and the rest of the world, is willing to do a free trade deal, is so instinctively pro the UK. And of course, America is the best economy in the world, is going to do gangbusters over the next 4 years. Why do Labour seem to want to tie us back into the EU and, even worse, go kowtowing over to China with its horrendous human rights abuses?
Because, James, I'm afraid it's in their DNA. James Price, I'm going to have to let you go and move on. You are brilliant. Thank you as ever. See you again soon, I hope. Look, before we go to a break, we've got to try and squeeze some of these calls in because there's been loads of them. Thank you very much, by the way, for your participation. Let's go to Ed in London, who wants to talk about the death penalty like most people do today.
Hi, Russell. Thanks for taking the call.
Pleasure, mate.
I had some really interesting discussions on this for your callers. If only you could clone Anne Widdecombe, I think the world would be a better place.
Or maybe she should be Home Secretary.
Yeah, most definitely. I'm 100% sure we should have the death penalty for cases like this where there is no dispute over, the heinous crimes.
The guilt.
Yeah, most certainly. We should have the death penalty. I mean, when we did have the death penalty, you actually had the gangs used to search themselves before they went out to do the crime to make sure nobody was had a gun on them.
Well, because they were worried about if they were caught that they would face the death penalty, but obviously once that was eradicated, they didn't have to worry about that.
Because if one of them got spooked and shot someone, they'd all go down, obviously for the same crime.
So, Ed, you're saying it is a deterrent in your book?
Oh, yeah, most certainly. And just think of the knife crimes that are going on in the country now. Just imagine if we had that deterrent, right, okay, somebody's got a machete or whatever on them, and they go out and do a crime, they're all going to be equally guilty. They would search each other before they go out. It would save countless lives.
Yeah, I mean, Ed, that there is already legislation that says if you're caught for a second time with a bladed instrument, you should do a mandatory 5 years in prison. That was brought in some time ago. Do you also know that 80% of people that are caught with a knife for the second time do not go to prison? So the law's already there. So this is the problem with our laws. They're simply not enforced by the police, by the CPS, or because some yoghurt-knitting social worker decides to kind of, put their hand up and say, well, yeah, but poor Johnny Smith, comes from a broken home, where there are severe mitigating circumstances, and then he goes in front of an equally liberal judge who then says, OK, well, let's give him a 9th chance, and he then goes off and murders someone on a bus.
Well, they're going to make room for the real criminals in this country, which are people who obviously send tweets.
Well, of course, they must be stopped. They must be stopped. They must be stopped, because if you go against the narrative, you're a far-right thug, Ed, you know that. Right, that was Ed in London. OK, well, look, we're going to take a break. Back after the break, and we're going to be talking about gender ideology. I'm really sorry about this, but we've got to talk about this. Children now are 50 times more likely to suffer gender distress than a decade ago. Honestly, what a load of old nonsense. Back in a tick.
Government borrowing costs hit a 27-year high, and the pound is taking a pounding. Gloomy economic data is expected to show inflation and growth are off course.
Let me ask again, and can you please be clear? Will Rachel Reeves be your Chancellor for the duration of this parliament?
Rachel Reeves is doing a fantastic job. She has my full confidence, and she has the full confidence of the entire party.
Can Rachel Reeves hold on as Chancellor?
It's obviously a very horrid situation for everybody. There is some disquiet, is there not, at the very least, about the way that the authorities have handled all of this.
At the moment, I think people here are just in that panicked fight or flight mode. It really is. You're in the lap of the gods. Everybody's on edge. Nobody feels safe.
As you know, where I live is on...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back, 12:25. I'm here just for another 35 minutes. Let's talk about gender distress. Is that something that affects you? Did you wake up this morning feeling distressed about your gender, I wonder? Well, before we go on, let's just remind you that according to anyone with common sense, there are two genders, male and female. Donald Trump agrees. He's made that a matter of an executive order. So as the leader of the free world, I guess we should take notice, shouldn't we? But not everybody is. It does seem that according to a study of NHS records, of course, what else? Kids are now 50 times more likely to suffer from gender distress than a decade ago. 1 in 1,200 kids in 2021, the latest figures, said they experienced turmoil over their biological sex by the age of 18. That compared to just 1 in every 60,000 in 2011. I wonder what's changed. Well, let's ask someone, shall we? Let's speak to Kelly J. Keane, who's founder of Let Women Speak. And I'm going to let you speak, Kelly J. Keane. What is going on here? This is nonsense, isn't it?
It is absolute nonsense. I think the first issue is the word gender, and it doesn't really mean anything. And we've begun to use it, like in law, legislation. We have something called the Gender Recognition Act, which is a legal fiction, which means a man can say he's a woman and a woman can say he's a man, and we all have to pretend that that's actually a thing. And when it comes to kids, I just think, I wonder if the sort of the parent advice not to use the word no has somehow coincided with this idea.
Or just to tell your kids, look, you're being utterly ridiculous, snap out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, you know, kids have lots of fantasies, and we as adults usually just pay them no attention whatsoever, which I think is what we should return to. You know, we had the Cass review recently, and she used the term gender distress, and I think, I think that was a gutless move. But also, why is the NHS recording this? Like, what is even what they would call gender distress?
And why do they think they need to? And also, I have to say, I mean, you would imagine that the question they are asking, in order to perhaps get a specific answer, would be rather loaded, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And also, look, you're not supposed to be happy all the time. That isn't how life shapes out. You're not supposed to be sort of skipping down the street with a big fat smile on your face all the time. Life can be quite difficult. Sometimes you feel a bit rubbish. I mean, I woke up this morning and I'm still a 50-year-old woman. I mean, that was ultimately distressing.
And you didn't fancy identifying as anything else today?
Pardon?
You didn't fancy identifying as anything else today? I mean, let me give you an example. I know of a school in Essex where there are children that identify as a thing called a furry. Do you know what that is?
Yes, it's, for want of a better description, it is a community of kind of slightly misfit children.
Slightly.
So very predatory men. And
it's basically those children that have identified or decided to identify as a cat.
Yeah, but I think parents should be forewarned. It sounds silly and funny, but there are conventions, and I really do think if your child is at all involved in furries, then you have to be very mindful of who they're talking to online and who they're meeting, because it really is a bit of a boundaryless.
You think there's something more sinister going on as an undercurrent?
Yeah, I think there is. I mean, look, on the surface, isn't it hilarious that your child wants to wear a cat and some cat tail and ears? But
well, don't about hilarious. I think, look, we have to question the mental health of these children and also those around them, parents and teachers, that by way of encouragement almost are enabling this so that the next child thinks it's normal behaviour, and therefore the next child, and all of a sudden you've got a class of children, 11, 12, 13 years old, that are identifying as nothing short of a menagerie of different animals, genders and types. I mean, we've got to stop this. I mean, as is happening in the US now, whereby Donald Trump has said, I'm mandating across the public sector and elsewhere that there are only two genders. We have to call a stop to this, because by not calling a stop to it, effectively we are enabling it and empowering it further.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, all the way through his executive order, he says two sexes, which I think is, and then he goes to define exactly what male and female sex is. And I'm delighted. And you'll see the words adult human female sat behind me, which was all over the executive order. So I'm ecstatic. But like you mentioned the word mental health, and I think that's also significant, that we have started talking to very small children about their mental health as if it's normal to sort of pathologize things and give it labels. And I think all of that needs to go. Like, my son had a mental health week when he was at primary school. Quite frankly, I just think children need to be...
Well, but yeah, clearly, because Kelly Jo, what happens then at the end of that week? Lots of kids start identifying as having mental health because it's been put in their heads. You know, if you've got 25% of your class that identify as a gender other than that which they were born with, then more are encouraged to do so. I mean, it's a rabbit hole. It's so obvious that this is becoming an epidemic of nonsense, but it's enabled by woke parents, some of whom actually, it would seem to me, want to become famous on TikTok and Instagram through the manipulation of their child's own gender. So you've got a combination of that and the weak-willedness of the authorities, the enabling of this absolute abject nonsense. I'm not quite sure where it ends, really.
Well, I think it ends with strong leadership, and I certainly don't feel that we've got that. But it's absolutely rife through the teaching unions. It's rife through the universities that train teachers. Obviously, the cheaper teachers are the newly qualified, so they'll have been indoctrinated into this nonsense. There's this thing about being friends with pupils in school as opposed to teaching them. It's a big, fat amount of rot. But I think we'll watch America over the next year very carefully, and we'll see that this thing, because it's built upon the sand, will really quickly disappear.
Well, let's hope it rubs off. I'm not sure it will on the government we have currently. Let's talk about Megyn Kelly unleashing on trans Emilia Perez star Carla Sofia Gascon. So this is the Oscars nominations that were announced yesterday. So I'm just trying to get my head around this. So we've got a film about someone where the actor is a trans actress, but is a man, playing a trans actress that is also a man, but has now been nominated for Best Actress, even though they're a man. I think that's right. The producer's nodding. Hopefully I've got that right. This again is all getting very confusing, isn't it? What do you make of this? And Megyn Kelly, I mean, hilariously, actually, has absolutely lambasted this nomination, because I would imagine that the Oscar for Best Actress should go to, what's that word? A woman.
I think they've got the nominations they deserve, actually, and I really I think it might be a little bit of a slight towards Donald Trump being elected that Hollywood has responded like this. But all those actresses that are the women that are up for this award, if they lose to that man and they say nothing about it, then I think maybe Hollywood deserves it.
But you know what will happen? This will be televised, of course, in due course, and the Angelina Jolies of this world will sit there politely clapping. Isn't it fantastic that he just got Best Actress? Or obviously she'll say she, I'm saying he, you're saying he. They're enabling it. I mean, how far out of touch can Hollywood get?
Well, I think they've proven. I think the pandemic really did put a big stake through the heart of Hollywood. I think we all sort of began to see behind the curtain, and this is just a further extension of it. But like I said, look, what's happened in America with this executive order, with this, there are only two sexes, and then Hollywood doing this, I think it's just got the ability to peak the rest of America, which means the rest of America will wake up to this nonsense, and those that have been silent for so long frightened to speak will actually be able to speak about it. So I think this actually is really good for my side of the argument, which is men can't be women.
Yeah.
But it's just perfect.
But again, it's enablement. And just to clarify, and just to make this very, very clear, so Carla Sofia Gascon, that masquerades as a woman and is potentially now going to become Best Actress, and of course she's going to win, isn't she? He. Is really Carlos Gascon. So let's be very, very clear. Carlos Gascon, as a man, is about to win, potentially, the Oscar for Best Actress. Can you imagine if we were having this conversation 10 or 15 years ago, how preposterous that would sound? And everyone would be laughing at us now, saying that could never happen, Kelly J.
Yeah, I know, it is nuts. But you had Caitlyn Jenner, or Bruce Jenner, years ago winning Woman of the Year. I think he called himself a woman for about 6 months, and he won the Glamour Woman of the Year. So, you know, maybe this is the final throes of just a nonsensical ideology that we all know.
Well, I hope so. And look, while we're talking about it, a quick hat tip to the LTA, the Lawn Tennis Association. You won't know this, I'm afraid, Kelly J, but my daughter is a paddle player. She's 15 years old. She does very, very well, by the way. She's number 2 junior in Britain. But she, in an open tournament a few months ago, had to play a number of players, including a trans woman, in other words, a man. And guess what happened? Actually, my daughter and her partner won the first set because the trans player played like a woman. Because they were losing in the second set, guess what? That man, masquerading as a woman, started playing like a man and beat my 15-year-old daughter. But the LTA have now, in a kind of a rare moment of common sense, have now banned trans players. It's now biological men will play as men, biological women will play as women. We need a bit more of that, don't we?
Yeah, fancy that. Fancy that even being something we have to talk about. Oh, you know, as if congratulating them. But I do, because I think in this current climate, you know, it's very easy just to go along and really not care about girls in girl sports whatsoever. So well done to them. But it's a shame that it's just not right across.
But the alternative is the eradication of the movement for equality for women that has been fought for the last 100 years. I mean, that's the point, isn't it?
Yeah, well, look, I started a political party called Party of Women, and the one thing we want to do is get rid of this GRA, get rid of the Gender Recognition Act, get rid of Gender Identity out of the Equality Act. In fact, I'd like to scrap the entire Equality Act and bring back some robust discrimination, but that's...
Do you think Labour are going to make it worse? I mean, just to make a political point, I mean, you know, we saw what happened in Scotland, where, you know, you'd have male rapists that then transition to women and end up in women's prisons, and that, of course, was effectively the end of Nicola Sturgeon's career, actually, thankfully. Yeah. Do you see the Labour government here, because of their left-leaning wokeism, falling on the same sword, potentially? No pun intended.
Yeah, look, I think Labour are so badly in cahoots with Davos, and Davos had this sort of global idea of something called sexual orientation and gender identity, which wipes out any rights that you have as a male or female. So I think Labour are going to really go hell for leather on this, and I think it's going to be horrendous. I think come 4 years, I think this country might be unrecognisable when it comes to women's rights.
Yeah, well, let's hope it's not too irreconcilable. Kelly J. Keane, founder of Let Women Speak, as ever, thank you very much for your very, very sensible approach to this particular subject. Thanks very much. OK, when we come back, we're going to talk about Heathrow expansion, a third runway. Hooray! That's good for the economy, good for people, good for travellers. And Ed Miliband might resign over it, but he says not. Let's talk about that after the break.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Okay, welcome back to I'm Smiling. I'm getting abuse from the gallery here. Not very nice, is it? I thought I was doing okay. Okay, let's talk about Heathrow expansion. A third runway. Now, I'm not an expert on this. Someone I'm going to talk to in a second might be. But this surely is a good thing, isn't it? I mean, as air travel becomes more accessible and cheaper, surely a third runway in terms of more air traffic for tourists, for freight, is a good thing, surely a good thing for employment, particularly in that part of London. But it seems that the Labour government is starting to eat itself over this because, of course, you've got a Chancellor that keeps talking about growth in Rachel Reeves. I'm not quite sure Rachel Reeves understands where growth comes from or what it is. She generally thinks it's from the public sector, but actually when it comes to such things as a third runway, she seems to be in favour of it because she understands that it is conducive with economic growth. But of course, one individual that will not agree with it is Mad Ed Miliband, who of course wants to take us back to the dark ages. He wants us all to be in horses and carts and using, I was going to say gas lamps, but I guess no, because they're gas. So no lighting, no heating whatsoever. So they are at odds. And Ed Miliband is reported to have said, this is a very odd thing to say. I guess he was asked a question directly, but he has said, I won't resign over Heathrow expansion. Now, that is against a backdrop of Rachel Reeves getting her own way in terms of sanctioning that third runway and Ed Miliband not wanting it, but actually not being a man of principle. I guess if you were over such things as your quest for net zero, maybe you would resign over a third runway being mandated by your colleague in the Treasury. So Ed Miliband won't resign, which I think is a massive shame, by the way, because I think he's a lunatic. Yes, but not a man of principle. Well, let's talk about that with Harry Wilkinson, who's head of policy at the Global Warming Policy Foundation. So apart from lamenting the fact that it looks like Ed Miliband's going to hang around for a little while, what are the benefits, do we think, Harry, of a third runway at Heathrow?
Well, Heathrow has been calling for a third runway for years and years. It's crazy that it hasn't happened. Now, this would create links with more countries around the world. We want to be trading with the rest of the world. We can create business links. We can bring in money from that. It means people can go and see their relatives, their loved ones, their friends. They can go on holiday. They can do all sorts of things.
But it's a huge thing for the economy, Harry. So it's an economic boost.
It's a huge boost to the economy. It will employ people in the local area as well. Already, Heathrow is a big employer. It would improve that situation even further. Airports are absolutely essential for growth, and it's good to see Rachel Reeves acknowledge that now, regardless of whatever else she's said and done. And I think this split that we're seeing in the Labour Party is really revealing, because the kind of net zero advocates who are saying this shouldn't go ahead, they are the really nasty side of the Labour Party at the moment, because what they're saying is we should just be poor in Britain. They're not interested in delivering something at a global level. Climate change is a global issue. If you want to change it, you have to have policies that people want to copy around the world. Who wants to copy this miserablest approach of us just being poor, not having airports, not being able to heat our homes affordably, having the most expensive energy in the world? No one is going to want to copy that. It's only going to make us poor. If we want other people to copy what we're doing, let's have cheap flights, let's have cheap energy, let's actually pioneer new technologies that can get emissions down and the cost of energy down. That's how you would create a global impact. But these people don't want a global impact. They think everything is about state planning. Now, there was a really interesting thing that happened this week. You had Chris Stark, and he's the civil servant that Ed Miliband put in charge of delivering net zero. He was talking about AI data centers, and he was saying that, they could be built, but only in the places where it was appropriate for the grid. And that reveals everything about their idea of the economy. They think that businesses and ordinary people should modify their lives to meet their political objectives. And actually, it should be the other way around. They should be serving us.
Yeah. Well, so Rachel Reeves and Ed Miliband are going to continue to be at odds because the two things, as in growth, which obviously involves building things, making things and providing infrastructure, and the quest for net zero. Do you think the penny is now dropping in that cabinet room that those two things, those two rather important things, particularly given the cost of this quest for net zero, £22 billion of taxpayers' money being put towards carbon capture, which even the likes of Dale Vince, he says, well, actually, it doesn't work. So are we now witnessing, apart from the delicious feast that is the Labour government eating themselves, the reality in that cabinet room that those two things are completely incompatible?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And this is a brilliant moment because we can see with crystal clarity how net zero is actually incompatible with economic growth, or at least the way that the government is going about it at the moment, with state plans, with picking winners, with banning things, this completely miserabilist approach to net zero that we've been seeing. Of course, that is incompatible with growth. And the Heathrow decision just makes that crystal clear.
Yeah. I really hope it's Ed Miliband doing the media rounds when that decision is made, where he has to somehow support his government for accepting and advancing the premise of a third runway for growth purposes, but also somehow square that with how that doesn't ride a kind of coach and horses through his net zero plans. And of course, the other more commonsensical point is that, even if Ed Miliband gets his way when it comes to taking petrol and diesel cars off the streets and us not having central heating boilers anymore and so on, and maybe having no runways in airports, no airplane travel at all, given our contribution to global carbon emissions is 1%, India is about 25%, United States is about 25%, China's is 25% or thereabouts and growing. Even if we were to reduce our 1% to zero, it would make precisely no difference whatsoever to the so-called problem of carbon emissions from a planetary point of view.
You're completely right. We're less than 1% of global emissions now, and nobody is copying us when we have the most expensive energy prices in the world. So this is a minimum impact policy when it comes to climate change, almost imperceptible impact. And yet it is a real impact for people here in Britain.
And honestly, do we really think that video, I've just got that in my head now, I'm afraid, Harry, that video of Ed Miliband with a windmill behind him, which was probably turned off because of the wind strength, frankly, with a ukulele playing. Do we really think that sends a message to the leaders of states across the planet that they should follow our lead? I think not. Harry, we've got to leave it there because I've got about 500 calls to squeeze in before we get to 1 o'clock. But look, thank you very much indeed. That's Harry Wilkinson, who's head of policy at the Global Warming Policy Foundation, the Ministry of Common Sense, as is this place, actually. Going to go to a break, back with lots and lots of your calls before 1 o'clock.
literally the entire city of the Pacific Palisades is burning.
Any message from you to Governor Newsom or Karen Bass tonight?
Spend less on hair gel. What can I say to them? Not big admirer of either.
As government borrowing costs hit a 27-year high and the pound is taking a pounding. Gloomy economic data is expected to show inflation and growth are off course.
Let me ask again, and can you please be clear? Will Rachel Reeves be your Chancellor for the duration of this parliament?
Rachel Reeves is doing a fantastic job. She has my full confidence, and she has the full confidence of the entire party.
Can Rachel Reeves hold on as Chancellor?
If a child is arrested for committing a crime with a knife, the parent should be arrested as well for lack of care of the child, and then they have to disprove...
I mean, you say parents. Realistically, we know in most of these cases there isn't a dad around, certainly not in the home.
Yeah.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Okay, hi, I'm Russell Quirk. I am here in the hot seat for Alex Phillips just for another few minutes. Ian Collins coming up. And of course, today and yesterday, unsurprisingly, the news here, and I'm sure everywhere else, has been dominated by the sentencing of the Southport killer. Let's not use his name, shall we? I've used his name several times today, and when I covered for Drive yesterday, his name has of course been mentioned, as you do when it comes to journalism and broadcasting. I'm sick of saying it, frankly, and would rather not. So we can refer to him as other things, but yeah, do me a favour for the next 8 minutes. If you're a caller that gets through, let's not mention his name. Let's not glorify his existence. Let's remember instead the girls that he murdered: BB King, Elsie Dot Stankham, and Alice De Silva Aguiar. Let's do that instead. We can refer to him, of course, as evil, a monster, the perpetrator of heinous crimes, a creature that is disgusting, a disgrace to humanity, the spawn of Satan, I think many people are calling him, and that's certainly true. But yes, let us not mention his name, please. Okay. So, look, we're going to go to some callers. There is some breaking news that I'm just reading on the screen, which, again, I'll take it slowly because it's literally breaking as I speak. A mother whose 4 young boys died in a fire after she left them home alone to go to Sainsbury's has just been sentenced for 10 years in prison. Again, we will talk about that, I'm sure. Maybe Ian Collins will pick that up. I suspect many of you, I would suggest, will think that 10 years is not enough. Here we go again. Right, it's Deveka Rose, by the way, age 30 is her name. Deveka Rose has been jailed at the Old Bailey for 10 years for the manslaughter of her 4 young sons who died in a house fire after being left home alone. Another despicable, disgraceful, so-called human being that our justice system has had to deal with. Honestly, I don't really want to share a planet with these people, do you? Let's go to the phones. Alex in Cheshire.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. I'm just calling up. I just wanted to put across my point of view. I'm wondering as to why the rat from Southport, his father, why he's not been investigated.
Well, we talked about that, didn't we, just now? And I don't know if there is an investigation ongoing. If there is, and look, if there are some charges brought, I don't know if the charges can be brought, then obviously that will be made public. Hopefully there won't be a vacuum of information in that regard. But Alex, I agree with you. I think it's inconceivable that the parents don't have a moral question or questions to answer, maybe even from a criminal perspective. Is that what you're suggesting too?
Yes, definitely.
How could they not have known that their, evil creature of a son had, for instance, a Tupperware pot of rice in under his bed, that had a crossbow under his bed, had a knife, and they certainly knew what he was like because he admitted and was caught going to school with a knife no less than 10 times. He'd called Childline and said, I don't know what to do, I want to kill people, and had to be restrained from getting into a taxi, or rather pulled out of a taxi a week before the Southport massacre because the father knew what he was going to do. More could have been done by the parents, more should have been done by the authorities. But as I said earlier, I think there has to be cases, there has to be a case to answer by parents, particularly of parents of those that are under 18. By very definition, Alex, they are children. You know, if he can't be sentenced as an adult, well, then he's the responsibility of his parents. If the parents knew what he was up to and what he was like, they surely have to face some accountability, don't they, Alex?
Of course, yeah, of course.
Yeah. Very busy behind you at your work.
Train station.
Alex, have you got kids?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Well, look, I don't think you have to have kids to qualify you for having empathy with the 3 young girls that died, or indeed the 10 young girls that he, the creature, the evilness that he is, attempted to murder. But I have to say, as a dad, I'm a dad of 3 daughters, ironically enough, and it hits home even more, I can tell you. Craig in Oxford. Craig in Oxford is next. Thanks, Alex.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Hi, Craig.
With the chance of getting the chance of upsetting people, your colleague Jeremy Kyle refers to as bedwetters.
Yeah.
We need to grow up a bit and look at this situation, what's happening in society. This guy's going to be put in prison. It costs currently $52,000 a year to house a regular prisoner that doesn't need isolation or special treatment or special care. Over 52 years, that's going to cost over £3 million just to sustain this scumbag's life.
Yeah.
Everyone's got a government gateway account. They could hold an online referendum, put it to the people, you log in, you cast your vote, and we can put this animal down.
So what are you suggesting here? A referendum on him, the evil Southport killer, being put to death?
On individual cases, when you have something that's of a massive national concern and interest like this, they don't have to have a ballot. We have to go to a hall and sign a bit of paper, this, that and the other. Everyone has a government gateway account.
So a directly democratic means of invoking the death penalty in certain circumstances?
Yeah, definitely.
Wow, that would be direct democracy, wouldn't it?
Well, exactly, and if we, that's the definition of civilization, isn't it? And
it's the definition of democracy. And look, many wouldn't disagree with you. Look, I'm gonna let you go if you don't mind, because I need to get to another caller, Stephen Chelmsford, before we get to Ian Collins, who just walked into the studio, who I'm sure will have a packed show for you over the next 3 hours. Steve.
Hello, mate. I'm just absolutely appalled. I mean, that fella, I say fella, animal.
Yeah, let's not mention his name, mate. Let's not give him the satisfaction.
No. It's a nightmare, isn't it?
It is. Worse than. You couldn't dream up a nightmare.
Hold on. You know what I wanted to tell you? That fella that stabbed his wife in Plymouth today, yeah, he's been on the. They know who he is. He's white. How comes they couldn't say about him?
Yeah.
Because he was black.
Yeah.
That's what it was.
Two-tier justice again. Two-tier policing. Yeah. All right, Steve, look, thanks very much indeed. And look, I'm going to have to let you go because we're coming up to the top of the hour, and I presume Ian Collins wants to do his show, unless he wants to carry on. Ian, what do you think? Should we do it together? I mean, it's up to you.
Yeah, I mean, have we done it before together? I can't remember. Probably.
No, you never invite me.
That's true. You've been on with us loads of times.
Not with you, I don't think.
Well, in fact, I think it was back in the old property days.